Lord of Mystery, The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong. Chapter 246-260. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 246, This Dream is Too Real. So, I'm dreaming. Emlyn lowered his head and looked at his hands. Having just crawled out of the coffin, he was no longer in the tuxedo he wore in reality, but instead donned a suit of armor. The inner layer was chainmail made of iron rings, and the outer layer was dark silver full-plate armor. A cloak seemed to be tied around his neck, but it was already in tatters, with only a bit of fabric remaining at the base. A forsythia longsword hung from his left hip, and an iron-shaped shield was strapped to his back. The front of the shield was engraved with Oswald, emblem formed by complex and exquisite patterns, still bearing hack marks left by blades. Overall, he looked like an ancient knight. Such attire remained popular even decades ago. It was the last glorious era of the knights. Those chest-armored knights charged madly towards formations of muskets and cannons, destroying opponents and flattening front lines. Unfortunately, they soon faced the invention and deployment of high-pressure steam rifles and Gatling guns. From then on, traditional knights completely lost their place. High-pressure steam rifles could easily pierce their chest armor, and Gatling guns could directly turn charging groups of knights into sieves. In front of armies equipped with steam rifles and Gatling guns, charging knights could only become easy targets. "This dream is too real," Emlyn muttered softly. As he sighed, Emlyn suddenly frowned and reached for his right hip. He felt an uncomfortable bulge there. After fumbling for a while, he took out a dark green glass bottle from his waist, which contained a golden yellow liquid. Open black lens bracket Estus flask close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket A dark green glass bottle. A treasure of the undead. Accumulate Estus at bonfires, drink it to restore HP. Since ancient times, the undead have always traveled between bonfires. And the Estus flask has always traveled with them. Close black lens bracket. Estus flask. Restore HP. A hint of confusion flashed in Emlyn's eyes, not understanding. Up to this point, he was still bewildered by everything that had happened. He didn't know what he was supposed to do, only instinctively looking around, warily observing his surroundings. 1 second he was still in front of Duke Olmer's tomb, lying on a bed woven from green grass and dreaming. The next second he appeared here. Appearing in a desolate graveyard, lying in a coffin. Around him were only nameless tombstones and stone coffins, either broken or intact, buried underground or exposed, but regardless of their condition, these stone coffins and tombstones were piled together, densely packed. Some of these stone coffins were already open, empty inside, as if the bodies buried within had left on their own, just like Emlyn who had just crawled out of a grave. But compared to the vast number of stone coffins in the graveyard, the opened ones were negligible. Looking around, the entire graveyard was filled with nameless tombstones and stone coffins, leaving almost no gaps. Even a rough estimate would put the number of stone coffins here at least in the tens of thousands. There was only one path before him, the other 3 sides were blocked by towering tombstones and cliffs. So, I just need to explore forward, right? Emlyn muttered to himself, quickly determining his goal. Although he didn't understand why he was having this dream, he was sure it was inextricably linked to Duke Olmer. Since that adult had him dream like this, he must want him to do something within the dream. And whatever Duke Olmer wanted them to do in the dream, exploration was the first step. As he walked forward, he soon encountered a person whose entire body was wrapped in black clothing, revealing emaciated limbs and a withered face. Even from a distance, Emlyn could hear the beast-like growls emanating from its mouth. Rather than a person in the traditional sense, it resembled some kind of zombie, which made Emlyn doubt if he could communicate with it. Emlyn was still hesitating, but the zombie had already discovered his presence. It seemed to suddenly become spirited, roaring and raising the straight sword in its hand, whose blade was snapped in half, and charged towards him. Although he still didn't understand the situation, Emlyn reacted immediately. His left hand held the shield, but he did not draw the longsword from his waist. As a sanguine, he had naturally undergone some degree of close combat training and was quite proficient with a longsword. But rather than using a longsword, he was more skilled in the traditional fighting style of the sanguine. The 5 fingernails on his right hand suddenly grew longer, sharp at the tips, covered in black patterns and symbols. The moment the zombie swung its broken straight sword down to slash, Emlyn had already raised his shield to block the attack. At the same time, he plunged his right hand, extended with sharp, corrosive claws, into the opponent's neck and ripped with force. Snap! The zombie's head was severed from its body, and it slumped powerlessly to the ground. The broken straight sword also lost its support and fell to the ground with a crisp sound. Open black lens bracket +20 close black lens bracket. But Emlyn felt no joy at defeating the enemy. Instead, he slightly furrowed his brows. Firstly, killing a zombie in a dream was not something to boast about. Secondly, Emlyn was clearly aware that this was a dream, but why could he use Beander abilities within the dream? In addition, there was a third point. There were a total of 12 Sanguine who entered the dream, in front of Duke Olmer. But why hadn't he encountered anyone else so far? Had the others not successfully entered the dream? Or had they already been killed by these zombies? Also, what was this +20? Surely not. Emlyn's expression was strange. The Sanguine who entered the dream were either Viscounts or Barons, surely they wouldn't be unable to handle these zombies. But if that wasn't the case, where had they gone? Had they left early? But if they had already left, why were these zombies still here? Had they not been attacked by the zombies? Ultimately, what exactly was this dream? In front of an open space beside a cliff, a blonde girl wearing a light blue dress suitable for movement stood in the center. Before her was a bonfire made of stark white bones, with a spiral sword stuck into it. Audrey reached out and gently touched the bonfire. The next instant, the fire seemed to sense something and ignited on its own. Is this the bonfire? Audrey's eyes lit up slightly as she murmured to herself. Since the incident with Adam last time, her relationship with Karula had become increasingly harmonious. Karula even invited her to dream together. And Audrey was indeed very curious about the dream constructed by Karula, as it was something that even Sequence 1 Adam paid attention to, so she gladly accepted Karula's invitation. As a result, 1 second she was still soundly asleep in her soft velvet quilt at home, and the next moment she appeared in this graveyard. Fortunately, Audrey was well prepared for all this and quickly adapted to the surrounding changes. Furthermore, as a beta tester, she didn't have to randomize her class upon birth, like others. Instead, following Karula's suggestion, she chose the useless person start, which allowed her to bring everything from reality into the dream, including the dress she was wearing. Although she encountered many zombies blocking the path along the way, with the help of psychological invisibility, Audrey was able to reach the bonfire unimpeded without engaging in combat. The only thing that puzzled Audrey was that Karula had said quite a few people should have entered the dream with her, but why hadn't she seen a single one? Was it due to the special nature of the dream? Although she was puzzled, Audrey still decided to continue exploring forward. Using psychological invisibility, she bypassed many paths or paths with handles. Finally, a towering city wall blocked her path. There were 3 arched entrances below the city wall, but 2 of the shorter ones seemed to be just decorative, blocked by bricks and stones. Only the arched doorway on the far right was clear. Passing through the arched doorway, a wide but ruined square appeared before Audrey. To the right of the square was a cliff, and to the left it was blocked by walls, piled up tombstones, and large trees with branches protruding from the ground. In front, there was another city wall, with a tightly closed door below it. In the center of the square was a tall figure half crouching on the ground. Even half crouching, his height far surpassed Audrey's, even exceeding that of most adult males. He wore a set of bright silver, ornate armor, inscribed with numerous intricate and exquisite patterns. To his right was a halberd with spiral patterns, diagonally stuck into the ground. His left chest was pierced by a spiral sword, which seemed to be restricting his movements. And from the back of his neck, some black tentacles, flowing like liquid, were growing, and constantly wriggling outwards. Even though it was the first time she had seen such a thing, Audrey instinctively felt disgusted, her delicate brows furrowed. And given that this tall knight looked very strong, Audrey cautiously decided to bypass him. Since she had advanced directly from Sequence 7 to Sequence 5, Audrey had no combat experience against enemies so far. And since psychological invisibility could avoid combat, there was no need for unnecessary fighting. Although she had psychological invisibility, Audrey still kept a wary eye on the half-kneeling tall knight out of the corner of her eye, worried that he might suddenly stand up and deliver a fatal blow. But none of that happened, and Audrey smoothly reached the tightly closed bronze door. If she were still a low sequence, Audrey might have been stumped by this closed door. But after advancing to Sequence 6 feet Hypnotist, the physical fitness of Beyonders of the Spectator pathway would be greatly enhanced. Both strength and agility would exceed ordinary human levels. And the physical fitness of Sequence 5 feet Dreamwalker would also be greatly strengthened. In terms of physical fitness alone, she was no less capable than Beyonders of the same sequence in other pathways. Audrey took a deep breath, placed her hands on the 2 panels of the door, and tentatively pushed with force. Rumble. Accompanied by a heavy grinding sound, the girl in the light blue dress pushed the door open, revealing a gap wide enough for one person to pass through. Audrey blinked. This seemed a bit easier than expected. Looking back at the tall knight still half kneeling in the center of the square, Audrey turned back, ready to continue exploring forward. Her gaze fell upon a tombstone ahead. In front of the tombstone was a large hunched skeleton. And on the skeleton was a white ball of light. Audrey reached out and touched it curiously. A line of text instantly appeared before her eyes. Open black lens bracket broken straight sword close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket a straight sword with half its blade broken off. Can no longer be considered a weapon. Unless wielded by a mad hollow. Otherwise, ordinary people should not use it. Weapon art. Stance. Normal attack following stance. Can break the guard of enemies blocking with shields from below. Heavy attack allows for a lunge and upward thrust. Can be used flexibly. However, it is difficult to use a broken straight sword effectively. Close black lens bracket. Is this the weapon the zombies were holding? Audrey thoughtfully put away the broken straight sword and continued upward along the ruined stairs. On both sides of the stairs were overgrown open areas, sparsely scattered with large numbers of tombstones. And beneath some of these tombstones sat some hollows, holding weapons. Further away on both the left and right were bottomless cliffs. Standing at the edge of the cliff and looking down, one could only see the bottomless white mist and the hazy snow-capped mountains in the distance. Winding upwards along the stairs, a towering building finally appeared before Audrey. Passing through the arched doorway, her vision was momentarily dim. But soon, illuminated by the candles scattered throughout the building, she saw a scene that shocked Audrey. She saw 5 thrones arranged symmetrically. These thrones varied in size, and around each throne, a considerable number of candles were placed. It seemed like an elegy for the owners of the thrones, or perhaps a tribute to them. 4 of these thrones were currently empty, with only a small figure seated on the second throne from the left. He wore bright red attire, a crown on his head, and rested his chin on his hands, seemingly in thought. Audrey looked down and realized she was on the second floor of the building. The building was circular overall, with stairs built along the edge to the second floor. One side held the 5 thrones, the other side was the entrance, where Audrey entered the building. To the right were 2 sets of stairs, one leading to the first floor, and the other leading to the third floor. On the stairs of the first floor sat a knight, with his head lowered, carrying a longsword on his back. He seemed different from the zombies outside. He was someone who could be communicated with. Welcome to the bonfire, Ashen One. The girl walked down to the first floor, just about to speak to the knight with his head lowered, when a gentle voice suddenly sounded by her ear. Audrey stopped in her tracks, startled for a moment. She felt this voice was somewhat familiar. She turned her head and saw a lady in a black dress standing in front of a circular platform on the left. She was looking at Audrey with a gentle smile. Audrey looked at her face and almost blurted out, "Karu." The lady smiled and interrupted her, introducing herself. "I am the fire keeper, one who tends to the bonfire, and serves you. Should you require assistance in seeking the lords who have abandoned their thrones, please command me." Audrey blinked. "So Karula, you have a role in this dream too." Chapter 247, Skipping class comes at a price. Audrey hesitated before speaking. Karula. Please call me the fire keeper," Karula interrupted, correcting her. Audrey saw that Karula seemed to have a deep obsession with this term, and gently nodded. "All right, fire keeper." Karula smiled and said softly. "Mr. Ember, what do you want to ask? Where is this place?" Audrey pondered for a moment and asked. A hint of nostalgia flashed in Karula's eyes, and she said softly. "This is the Firelink Shrine, where the thrones of the Lords of Cinder stand. And what you need to do is bring the kings who have abandoned their thrones back to their rightful thrones." Transferring fire. Audrey fell silent. She remembered that Mr. Ember had told her that transferring fire was his destiny. Does this mean that everything she is experiencing now is likely Mr. Ember's past? And why did Karula expend so much effort to create such a dream? What does this have to do with Mr. Ember? Audrey was full of questions, but she didn't voice them. She just asked softly, "Fire Keeper, what should I do next?" "You can try exploring the Firelink Shrine, or you can communicate with others in the Firelink Shrine to gather useful information, but the most important thing is..." Karula offered some constructive suggestions, but then reached out and pointed to the extinguished brazier in front of her. "You need to find the spiral sword and relight the bonfire." Spiral sword. Audrey was a little confused, but quickly thought of the bonfire she had encountered before, which also had a spiral sword stuck in it. In other words, only bonfires with a spiral sword stuck in them can be lit. But where was she supposed to find a spiral sword? Audrey suddenly remembered the tall knight she had met kneeling in the square. There was a spiral sword stuck in his chest. Audrey hesitated and asked, "So, I have to go back to the square, pull the sword out of that knight's chest, and bring it back here?" "Yes." Karula smiled and nodded. "We usually call this kind of behavior skipping class." Audrey blinked. So, she shouldn't have skipped class by using psychological invisibility. Should she clear out all the zombies she encountered along the way? With the help of psychological invisibility, it shouldn't be difficult to ambush and kill those zombies from behind. But that knight, who looked very strong, made Audrey, who had no practical combat experience, feel a bit apprehensive. So she just silently kept all this in mind, but didn't immediately return to the square to try to pull out that spiral sword. Because she remembered Karula saying that she could first explore the Firelink Shrine and communicate with others. The Firelink Shrine is generally circular, and all areas within it are interconnected. And on the second floor of the Firelink Shrine, on the back of the 5 thrones, are engraved the names of the throne owners, from left to right. Irithyll Dungeon, Saint Eldritch. Ludlith the Exile. End of the Bloodline, the Saint King of Lothric. Watchers of the Abyss. Profaned Capital, Yorm the Giant. The 5 thrones are symmetrical from left to right. Except for the throne of Ludlith the Exile, which has a thin old man on it, the owners of the other 4 thrones are not on their thrones. These throne owners are the kings who have abandoned their thrones. And what Audrey has to do now is bring these 4 people back to their thrones. In addition to this, although the arrangement of the thrones seems to follow a specific pattern, they are not strictly symmetrical in size. The throne belonging to Ludlith the Exile is the smallest, followed by the Abyss Watchers, then the thrones off Saint Eldritch, and the Saint King of Lothric, were larger, and located on the far right, the throne belonging to Yorm the Giant, is the largest. Audrey guessed that this might be related to the size of these Lords of Cinder themselves. She had seen 3 of them in her dream. Eldritch, Yorm the Giant, and the Abyss Watchers. Yorm is a giant, and his size is naturally far beyond that of an ordinary person, so it is normal for his throne to be the largest. Only the Abyss Watchers, they are like the Fosak people who are said to be descendants of giants. Although they are still taller than ordinary people, they are within the normal range. But even so, it couldn't explain the doubts in Audrey's mind. For example, there seem to be many Abyss Watchers, and one throne doesn't seem to be able to seat them all, right? Also, Yorm the Giant, although his throne is the largest, it is still nothing compared to his massive size. Even if he were brought here, he probably wouldn't be able to sit on it at all. But since Karula spent a lot of effort to build this dream, she would definitely not make such a low-level error. So, is there something she doesn't know about this? Audrey really wanted to ask Karula for clarification, but before that, she thought she could ask others first. For example, Ludlith the Exile, the only one sitting on the throne. Audrey searched the entire Firelink Shrine, and she only found 5 living people. In addition to Karula, who is the Fire Keeper, there was only the knight she first saw with his head down, Ludlith on the throne, an old woman, and a blacksmith. And among them, the highest in status should be Ludlith the Exile, the Lord of Cinder sitting on the throne. Audrey stood below Ludlith's throne and politely asked, "Hello, Mr. Are you Mr. Ludlith?" "Oh, a polite little girl." Ludlith seemed to finally notice her, and said with emotion, "Before becoming an ashless ember and a seeker of kings, you must have been a well-educated noble lady. It turns out that not only short people like me, but even people like you are bound by the curse." "Ah, sorry. I was a bit distracted, but you guessed right, I am Ludlith of Corland. You might not believe it, but I am a Lord of Cinder who once transferring fire, and this body that is still enduring the burning of the tiny fire is ironclad proof. This broken body, if you look closely, you should be able to see it clearly, right?" Listening to Ludlith's somewhat self-deprecating tone, Audrey subconsciously looked at Ludlith's lower body. There was nothing there. Yes, although he was a Lord of Cinder sitting high on his throne, Ludlith had lost both of his legs. And about this, Audrey actually had some guesses. Because in the scene she saw when she entered the dream, only 3 of the 5 new kings appeared. Saint Eldritch, the Abyss Watchers, and Yorm the Giant. The Saint King of Lothric and Ludlith the Exile were not among them, but perhaps it wasn't absolute. For example, Ludlith the Exile. The other 4 Lords of Cinder had abandoned their thrones, but only Ludlith sat on his throne. This does not mean that he did not abandon his throne, he may have been forced back to his throne. Because in one of the scenes, Audrey saw a knight dragging a person with only an upper body back to the Firelink Shrine. And that person with only an upper body might have been Ludlith. In other words, Ludlith's legs may have been broken by the ember and dragged back. He might have also wanted to abandon his throne like the other Lords of Cinder, but his luck didn't seem to be very good. Although this was likely the truth of the matter, Audrey was very wise not to ask it directly. Even in a dream, even if the Ludlith in front of her was just a product of dream fantasy, it was still not good to rub someone's wound in person. Audrey carefully chose her words and asked, "Do you know anything about the other Lords of Cinder?" Other Lords of Cinder. Ludlith looked at the other thrones on either side and said with a complex tone. "Although we are both Lords of Cinder, the times we transferring fire are not the same, and we had no contact before this, so my knowledge of them is quite limited. I have only heard some stories about them. Of course, if you really want to know, I can tell you some." Audrey immediately put on a look of humble inquiry. Ludlith looked at the throne on his right and said softly, "Eldritch, it is rumored that he was once a cleric of the White Church. Originally, he was the agent representing Lothric in the profaned capital to study the profaned flame. His mind was affected by the profaned flame, and he developed a habit of eating people, so he was dismissed and imprisoned in the Irithil dungeon as a tool for dealing with the undead. Those undead would be sent to Eldritch's mouth as sacrifices along the sacrificial offering road. Years of cannibalism and the influence of the Irithil dungeon caused him to lose his human form and turn into a puddle of mud, but the accumulation of souls also gave him the power to become a Lord of Cinder. Lothric sealed him as Aesaint, to be the fuel for the first fire. After transferring fire, he was buried in a coffin deep within the Irithil dungeon. Cannibalism. Audrey immediately felt a chill down her spine. Such behavior was simply unacceptable to the world. In the Ruined Kingdom, he would definitely be sentenced to 100 death penalties and it wouldn't be enough. But in this world, in order for him to transferring fire, such a person was instead sealed as Aesaint, which was absurd and bizarre. Ludlith, however, seemed not to notice Audrey's strangeness and continued to introduce Yorm the Giant. He is a descendant of the ancient conqueror. With his giant body, Yorm was invincible, helping the people of the profaned capital repel foreign enemies and expand their territory. But the people of the profaned capital did not thank Yorm for this. They were full of apprehension towards Yorm because they feared that Yorm's great power would threaten their safety. Until one day, the profaned flame descended from the sky, and the inextinguishable flames burned everything around it. To resolve this crisis, the people nominated Yorm to be the king of the profaned capital. Although Yorm knew that the people who nominated him as king were not sincere, he still agreed to their request. However, even Yorm was powerless against the inextinguishable profaned flame, until he heard a rumor. The appearance of the profaned flame was because the first fire was about to go out, and as long as the first fire could be rekindled, the profaned flame could be extinguished. So Yorm, who was determined to save the people of the profaned capital, resolutely chose to embark on the path of transferring fire. Watchers of the Abyss, the Farron Undead Legion. They are the inheritors of the will of Artorias the Abysswalker, who signed a covenant with the Great Wolf of Farron, shared the wolf blood, and were a group of warriors who monitored the Abyss and wiped out any signs of Abyss encroachment. To prevent the encroachment of the Abyss, they would not hesitate to destroy a country. The individual members of the Undead Legion are not enough to become Lords of Cinder. Their strength comes from the power of the group. After sharing the wolf blood, the Undead Legion gained the qualification to become Lords of Cinder. To perpetuate the first fire, Lothric used the Undead Legion, who suppressed the Abyss, as fuel for transferring fire. Finally, Ludlith looked at the topmost throne and said with a complex tone. Lothric has two princes, the elder Prince Lorien and the second Prince Lothric, who was given the same name as his country. Prince Lothric was given high hopes for transferring fire even before he was born, but after birth, he was physically weak and failed to become the hero who wielded the platinum sword as the royal family expected. The elder Prince Lorien, in order to protect his younger brother, even resisted the mission of transferring fire, believing it to be a cursed path. This led to internal strife in Lothric. The Knights of Lothric fought each other because of their differing beliefs, while the twin princes hid at the top of the grand archives of Lothric, waiting for the day when the flames would extinguish and the era would end. It is precisely because Prince Lothric resisted the mission of transferring fire that we ancient Lords of Cinder who have already transferring fire were awakened by the bell and once again fulfilled the mission of transferring fire. Audrey hesitated to speak. Is this what you meant by limited knowledge, and only heard some rumors? This is a bit too detailed. Of course, Audrey also knew that this was just a dream, just a recreation of past legends. It might not even be a complete recreation. For example, Audrey always felt that Karula had a lot of personal bias, otherwise, why would she arrange the role of Firekeeper for herself? The real Ludlith himself might indeed have limited knowledge of the other Lords of Cinder. But this is a dream, and this, Ludlith, in front of her is just a product constructed by the dream. And since the dream was constructed by Karula, everything that Ludlith said might just be Karula speaking through him. And this also gave Audrey new guesses about Karula's purpose. Transferring fire is clearly impossible. This is just a dream, and transferring fire in a dream has no meaning. What Karula is pursuing is perhaps just reliving the past stories and presenting the truth of all this to the world. And everything that happens in the dream is just serving this goal. Understanding this, Audrey no longer dwelled on the person who spoke this information, but instead began to analyze the information itself. Judging solely from the experiences of these 5 Lords of Cinder, transferring fire itself does not seem as glorious as its literal meaning. Instead, it is full of various dirty deals, with those in power unscrupulously sealing people with powerful souls as Lords of Cinder, treating them as tools for transferring fire as a matter of course, and even the Undead Legion who suppressed the Abyss were used as fuel. To transferring fire, they even abandoned the Abyss. Is transferring fire really that important? Even before she had truly experienced all this, Audrey was already questioning it. Thinking of this, Audrey suddenly had a feeling. Perhaps the doubts she had were exactly what Karula hoped for. Karula wanted her, or rather, wanted everyone who entered this dream, to have the same doubts. Chapter 248, Is That It? Emlyn woke up with a start from his dream, sweat beading on his forehead. But when he woke, he found himself lying on a bed woven from grass, facing a vibrant tomb. I didn't die. Emlyn touched his body with a mix of surprise and doubt. After confirming he was unharmed, he let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt a bit self-mocking. It was just a dream, why did he think he had really died? A deep voice came from inside the tomb. You are the last one. Duke Ulmer. Emlyn quickly got out of bed and bowed respectfully. Emlyn glanced around with his peripheral vision and realized that the other sanguine who should have been lying on the beds dreaming, just like him, had already left. He was the only one remaining, which made Emlyn even more nervous. Could he have overslept? No need to be nervous. Duke Ulmer said gently. Being the last one to wake up precisely indicates your potential. What potential? Emlyn stood there, looking confused and somewhat puzzled. Then he heard the deep voice from inside the tomb ask, "What did you experience in your dream?" Emlyn immediately reacted, organized his thoughts slightly, and recounted his dream experience. I saw some strange scenes, related to the Lord of Cinder and the transferring fire. Immediately after, I found myself waking up from a coffin, and along the way, there were some strangely dressed zombies. At a fork in the road, I saw a huge ice-blue lizard at the end of one path. But since that path was a dead end, I didn't choose to continue. I found a bonfire with a spiral sword stuck in it. On the plaza not far from the bonfire, there was a giant wearing silver armor with a spiral sword piercing his chest. I bypassed him and reached a circular building. Inside, there were 4 people. An old woman, a blacksmith, a crestfallen guy, and a thin old man with disabled legs. The thin old man with disabled legs claimed to be Ludlith, a Lord of Cinder. The old woman claimed to be the shrine handmaid. She told me this was the Firelink shrine, and if I wanted to continue fulfilling my mission, I had to retrieve the spiral sword from the knight in the plaza. Finally, I pulled out the spiral sword, but I also died at the hands of that knight named Gouda. Emlyn told Duke Ulmer everything that happened in his dream in great detail. Towards the end, Emlyn couldn't help but shiver. Although it was a dream, it felt incredibly real, especially the impression of his body being smashed to pieces inch by the swing of the halberd. Even now, Emlyn's body still ached faintly, as if every bone had been shattered. He felt that Gouda was at least sequence 4 or stronger, otherwise, it wouldn't have been so difficult for him, a sequence 6, to cope. This was definitely not because he was weak, but because the enemy was too strong. Ulmer listened and then said, You did very well. Among everyone, you went the furthest. Everyone. Emlyn couldn't help but ask. Duke Ulmer, did we have the same dream? Of course. Ulmer chuckled, you were all in the same dream. Emlyn asked, puzzled. Then why did I never see them? You will know in the future. Seeing that Duke Ulmer didn't directly answer his question, Emlyn was a little disappointed, but soon asked with some curiosity. Duke Ulmer, you said I went the furthest. What about them? How did they die? He died at the hands of that knight yet was still the one who went the furthest, which brought a little comfort to Emlyn's heart. Indeed, even he, whom the ancestor placed great hopes on, couldn't kill Gouda. Others would be even less likely to do so. Facing Emlyn's questions, Ulmer didn't hide anything and said, 3 died to the crystal lizard, 5 died to the expert, and 2, like you, were killed by the Ashen Judgment Gouda, but they didn't reach the Firelink shrine. Emlyn asked curiously, Duke Ulmer, what about the last one? Duke Ulmer was silent for a moment, then said with a complex tone. Another one died by falling off a cliff. Quote. Emlyn's expression became strange, looking like he wanted to laugh but had to hold it back with all his might. To be honest, he really wanted to know who that unlucky person who fell off the cliff was. You can go back first. Come here again tonight. If you are unable to come, you can have someone inform Cassimi in advance. Duke Olmer, the sanguine duke titled Full Moon, said no more, ended the topic, and let Emlyn leave the hall. Yes, Duke Olmer. Emlyn bowed respectfully, took a few steps back, and then turned to leave the hall. Empress Burrow, inside Earl Hall's family's luxurious villa. This is too difficult. Audrey sat in front of her dressing table with her legs together, sighing softly. Although she had experienced death in the dream and fully felt the fear and pain before dying, as a sequence 5 of the spectator pathway, Audrey had adjusted her mindset long ago and wouldn't be left with a trauma because of this. But she was still incredibly troubled by it, because this dream was simply too difficult. She was already a sequence 5 dreamwalker, but the Ashen Judgment Gouda was at least a sequence 4 or higher demigod. Furthermore, Beyonders of the spectator pathway were never known for their combat prowess. Although she, as a sequence 5, had mastered many combat techniques, most were inclined towards mental attacks. Against Beyonders of the same sequence or even higher sequences from other pathways, mental attacks often achieved miraculous results because Beyonders of other pathways usually lacked experience in this area and had no means to counter them, thus allowing for unexpected effectiveness. However, the enemies she faced in the dream were either mindless zombies or the Ashen Judgment Gouda. These, mental attacks, were difficult to exert their effect, and yet the spectator pathway lacked means of physical attack. Although Audrey also tried to use psychological invisibility to sneak away, the psychological invisibility that had been effective against zombies suddenly failed this time. So, with all her Beyonder abilities being nearly ineffective, Audrey could only watch as Gouda's halberd struck her dead. Although she understood that this was just a dream, it still left Audrey with a deep sense of frustration. Because if she encountered a similar enemy in reality, there would likely be only one possibility, a tragic death. Even if she had a sacrifice ring, even if she could revive, it would only mean being killed by the enemy again. Is it very difficult? Karula sat on the edge of the bed, swinging her fair, tender legs lightly, and asked with some schadenfreude, Gouda is just the first enemy you encountered, you know. Quote. Audrey was speechless. Of course, it wasn't difficult for you, since the entire dream was constructed by you. But she was just an ordinary sequence 5. A hint of slyness flashed in Karula's eyes, and she teased. Want me to help? How would you help? Audrey asked cautiously. Karula said with a smile. I can't directly help you kill Gouda, but I can make you stronger. Sequence 4. Audrey asked hesitantly. She knew that Karula possessed a king soul and could directly allow her to skip the process of digesting, concocting potions, and preparing rituals to advance. So when Karula said she could make her stronger, she subconsciously thought of this method. Although this was indeed very convenient and wouldn't leave any side effects, Audrey actually didn't really want to become stronger through this method. No. Karula shook her head and explained. If you advance to sequence 4 now, you won't be able to enter the dream anymore. If she could let Audrey advance to sequence 4 in one go, she would have done so long ago, instead of letting her stay at the awkward sequence 5. Then how will you make me stronger? Audrey breathed a sigh of relief, while also asking with some confusion. It's simple. Karula spread her palm, and a flame rose from her fair and delicate palm. She gazed at Audrey, her lips slightly curled upwards, and whispered. Although you don't want to be my apprentice, I can still teach you some things, like magic. Magic. Audrey blinked, but soon she knew what Karula meant by teach. A weak wisp of flame separated from the fire and entered the girl's body in the blink of an eye. And at the same time, Audrey suddenly found that she had learned 2 Beyonder abilities. Open black lens bracket soul arrow close black lens bracket and open black lens bracket great soul arrow close black lens bracket. These were neither mental attacks nor physical attacks, but genuine magic attacks. Audrey opened her eyes and looked at the black-dressed girl sitting on the edge of the bed with complex emotions. Just as she was about to thank her, she saw Karula say seriously. Given your relatively low intelligence, I can only teach you these 2 spells for now. Quote. Audrey's cheeks puffed out immediately. Was her intelligence very low? Landenheim, at the top of the Toddbringer family castle. Lucius, who hadn't personally taken action for a long time, stood up from his scarlet throne. From his appearance, he was a big guy 5 meters tall, wearing a full set of silver armor, giving off an exceptionally heavy feeling. Every detail followed an ancient style, like unique and magnificent decorations. The crimson moonlight shone through the hollow windows, illuminating the silver armor, as if covering it with a layer of crimson gauze, making him look like he was wearing a set of blood-red armor. Judging solely from his appearance, he looked more like a giant than a sanguine. But Ember had no time to carefully determine whether Lucius looked like this because he had fused too many Beander characteristics of the warrior pathway or if he deliberately manifested a huge body for the sake of majesty. Because the moment Lucius stood up, everything around him came alive. The grass covering the ground and walls became incredibly wild at this moment. They all waved their fibers, growing wildly as if greedily absorbing nutrients. Soon, they grew from blades of grass less than half a meter tall into towering blood-red trees. Those huge blood-red, almost black trees waved their branches, pulled out their roots one after another, and then, like humans, approached Ember step by step. Looking around, the surroundings were already filled with dense, almost sky-obscuring trees. Even the walls seemed to have come alive, countless scarlet eyes and gaping maws split open on the originally intact walls, surging towards Ember like a tide. And facing this scene, which was like the end of the world, Ember was instead stunned, as if he had been scared silly. But in reality, Ember was just deeply confused. Because he had seen a similar scene on another angel before. Queen of Giants, Harvest Goddess, Omibella. Omibella was a Sequence 2 desolate matriarch of the plantar pathway, thus possessing omnipotence in life. But now it seemed Lucius was also like this. The similarity between the two pathways might also be the reason why Lilith would switch to the plantar pathway in the future. Regarding this, Ember felt he might need to remind Lilith. While he was thinking, a branch suddenly lunged towards Ember's head. And at the end of that branch, countless slender, slimy fibers extended like tentacles, enclosing a huge mouth like a lamprey, composed of countless sharp teeth. And at this moment, this huge mouth was wide open, as if to bite off Ember's head completely. And it was only now that Ember seemed to finally react. But he still made no move, merely calmly rang the Filianor's chime in his hand. Ding-a-ling. In the clear ringing sound, a white light emerged from the seemingly impenetrable blood-red forest. The white light was like a fleeting epiphyllum, obscured by more trees in just an instant. But in the next second, the white light suddenly converged into a terrifying shockwave, sweeping outwards. The blood-red forest, the branches like a combination of lampreys and octopuses, the walls with thousands of scarlet eyes and gaping maws, were all pierced, crushed, and completely engulfed and disappeared by the white light in this instant. It was as if the world had become quiet at this moment, with only that pure white light remaining in the entire world. Open black lens bracket Wrath of the Gods close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket The ancient prototype of Force releases a strong shockwave. Wrath of the Gods is a very long story. And Force is its simplified version. This is a story describing extreme anger, which can inflict great damage accompanied by a shockwave. Close black lens bracket. Bang. Finally, the sound arrived late, like a network connection interruption, amidst a violent noise. The white light seemed to expand to its maximum, then suddenly contracted towards the center. Finally, it returned to nothingness and disappeared. The world returned to peace once again, and the crimson moonlight shone down from the sky, as if nothing had happened. The luxurious domed hall disappeared, and on the ruined but flat architectural remains, only two figures still stood. One was Ember, and the other was no longer the 5-meter-tall scarlet big guy. Instead, it was a blonde youth who had been knocked to the ground and was struggling to get up. His height was not short, but compared to the scarlet big guy from before, there was clearly a huge difference. And this confirmed Ember's guess. The scarlet big guy was just a disguise manifested by the other party. Chapter 249, Terrifying Sizzle Boom Person. Before meeting Lucius, Ember had thought he was a heroic figure. After all, in an era without blasphemy slates, where the concepts of sequence and pathway were unknown, Lucius was able to rise all the way to become a Sequence 2 angel. Both luck and strength were indispensable. The fact that the Sanguine have only had one such Sequence 2 to date shows just how difficult this path was. Furthermore, Landenheim, which he single-handedly built, was also managed in an orderly fashion. Even ordinary people could live here safely. Although they were treated as blood food by the Sanguine, regularly providing blood, being sustainably exploited. But at least it was much better than living precariously outside, having to live in fear every day. From any perspective, Lucius should have been a Sanguine with great ambition and talent. But unfortunately, when Ember met Lucius, he was already a pure puppet, a walking corpse controlled by the avatar of the Mother Goddess of Depravity. This was evident at a glance. Although his strength was undiminished from back then, for Ember, the meaning was vastly different whether he was fighting a god, like a hero, or fighting a controlled puppet. Of course, the process couldn't change the outcome. Whether hero or puppet, the outcome was already decided. So, goodbye. Ember watched Lucius, who had gotten up from the ground and instantly vanished under the scarlet moon, calmly clench his right hand. At that moment, Ember held sunlight in his hand. Sizzle. As if the purest golden light in the world converged into a brilliant long spear, the solidified sunlight continuously tore through the fragile space, causing the surrounding void to emit a sizzling sound like a strong current due to the unbearable pressure. Boom! The sunlight spear was suddenly thrown by Ember. The solidified sunlight instantly tore space, causing the torn void to present a pure dark vision, drawing a crack as obscure as the abyss across the vast sky. At the same time, it also pierced through Lucius's body, piercing through the sanguine angel who was constantly flashing under the moonlight, not even knowing where he had flashed to himself. In the dazzling golden light, this ruler of Landenheim, the sanguine's only angel, didn't even have time to leave a last word. His body was completely torn apart and decomposed into the most primordial particles by the dazzling light. He had completely disappeared from this world, but in a sense, he also existed everywhere, just in a different form. It's like money isn't really spent, but just accompanies you in another form. Open black lens bracket sunlight spear close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket a miracle of, initial Lord of Cinder, Gwyn. Can throw sunlight spears. This is about Gwyn hunting the ancient dragons. A story about the beginning of the Age of Fire, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket polluted angel soul times 1 close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket polluted, life giver, Beander characteristic times 1 close black lens bracket. The apothecary pathways sequence 2 is life giver. Ember came to a realization, the planter pathways sequence 2 is desolate matriarch. Judging solely from the names, both correspond to authorities related to life, but they are diametrically opposed. Sequence 2 is life giver, sequence 0 is, the moon, so what is sequence 1? Beauty goddess. Ember recalled Ornia in the future, after Lilith's fall, she became the new leader of the Sanguine, and Ornia's title was beauty goddess. The god of life, the goddess of life corresponds to, life giver, so perhaps what beauty goddess corresponds to is precisely, beauty goddess. Of course, the specific names of the sequences weren't actually that important to Lilith and the others. After all, they didn't need to act or digest. And now, the most important thing. Ember's gaze looked into the distance. Under the scarlet moonlight, a massive shadow was constantly fleeing into the distance. And within the shadow, the tall black-bladed assassin was pursuing like a shadow. After Lucius died, the avatar of the mother goddess of depravity immediately began to flee into the distance without hesitation, clearly intending to abandon this stronghold. If she were the main body, she definitely wouldn't have run away so decisively. But she was just an avatar, and an avatar unable to contact the main body. Because her main body was isolated outside the world and temporarily unable to exert influence on this world. If not for the connection with the main body through the moon pathway, the main body wouldn't even have been able to send in this avatar. A puppet like Lucius was fine no matter what, even if he died, another could be found, but she couldn't die, absolutely couldn't die. Ember didn't know what the avatar of the mother goddess of depravity was thinking, but since she had been locked onto by him, it was impossible to let her leave. But just as he was about to move, figures suddenly appeared from under the scarlet moonlight. They were male and female, old and young, exactly 11 in number. Without exception, they all had red eyes, which revealed their sanguine identity. At the same time, the divinity on them indicated that these people before him were, without exception, demigods. There was a fundamental difference between ordinary beyonders and demigods, and the difference came from the divinity possessed by demigods. Of course, this fundamental gap wasn't clearly displayed. After all, demigods wouldn't constantly exhibit their divinity, nor would they recklessly use mythical creature forms, because even for demigods, this was also a huge burden. But in Ember's eyes, what he saw was the essence of these demigods, not their appearance. Because to Ember, everything in this world could be roughly divided into two types. Combustible and non-combustible. And if classified by the Beander's sequence, then demigods had just reached the threshold of combustible material. Those below demigod didn't even have the qualification to be burned, while demigods barely had the qualification to be burned. For Ember, the identifiability of such burnable targets was exceptionally high. And combining the strength of these demigods with the exact number, 11, it wasn't difficult to determine the identity of these people. The patriarchs of the 12 families of Landenheim. Although the 12 families were nominally equal and jointly ruled Landenheim, everyone knew that Lucius of the Todbringer family was the true master of this city. Because he possessed transcendent strength that could crush the patriarchs of the other 11 families. And now that an explosion had occurred in the Todbringer family's castle, the other 11 families naturally raised their utmost vigilance and rushed to the scene immediately. From the explosion to their arrival, it was only a matter of seconds. But when they arrived, the scene was already a complete mess. The originally magnificent and towering castle still stood in place, the lower floors still intact, but its soaring spires and most of the upper floors had vanished. It was as if everything had been annihilated in the explosion, just now, not even leaving behind a single piece of rubble. This terrifying destructive power made even the patriarchs of the 12 families, who were demigods, feel uneasy. Although they, as demigods, could also achieve the same destructive power, truthfully, none of them dared to act presumptuously in the Todbringer family's castle, in front of Lucius. So they were very clear that the one who could cause such a huge commotion in the Todbringer family's castle could only be a god, whose strength was not much different from Lucius's. Under the great power of a god, they, who were merely demigods, were simply not worth mentioning. But even so, they still chose to come to the scene immediately. Because they knew very well that if they didn't go, regardless of the outcome of the battle, they wouldn't have a good end. If Lucius was defeated, Landenheim would undoubtedly be destroyed by the enemy. Their descendants might have a chance to escape, but they, the patriarchs who possessed powerful blood essence, would definitely not be able to escape. If Lucius won, it would certainly be a good thing for Landenheim, but they would inevitably be held accountable afterward for not providing timely support. So no matter what, they had to rush to provide support immediately. By cooperating with Lucius, who was a god, they might have a chance to take down the attacking enemy in a short time. Moreover, once the enemy was killed, they would even have a chance to obtain the enemy's residual blood essence. And if even so, they were still no match, they could also make other plans. But even though they had considered many possibilities, even though they believed they were fully prepared, the situation was still completely beyond their expectations. They had envisioned the enemy being too strong, causing Lucius to fall into a disadvantage, and even considered taking the opportunity to escape once Lucius's decline became apparent. But they never expected that when they arrived, Lucius was already gone. And they appeared before the enemy completely unprepared, like exquisite pastries delivered right to the door. Cold sweat broke out on the foreheads of the 11 patriarchs of the major families almost simultaneously. Looking at the young man who was watching them as if scrutinizing prey, they felt a chill down their spines. There was only a time difference of a few seconds, but Lucius had already disappeared. Either Lucius had been killed, or Lucius had deemed himself no match for the young man before him and had already run away. And they had just walked right into the muzzle, actively rushing over to buy time for Lucius. They were more inclined towards the second guess, but regardless of which guess it was, they would be facing the enemy that even Lucius feared. Their minds were almost blank, with almost only one answer left. Run. Those who reacted slowly were still frozen in place, while those who reacted quickly had already begun to act. Excuse us, goodbye. An old man dressed like a sage made a decisive move, leaving a sentence behind and directly flashing away. As sanguine, they were naturally blessed by the red moon, possessing the ability to flash under the moonlight. As long as it was within the range illuminated by the moonlight, they could even traverse the entire city in an instant. Perhaps the sanguine were weaker than other extraordinary races in terms of combat, but in terms of escaping, the sanguine could usually rank in the top 2. Seeing that someone had run away ahead of time, the remaining people's expressions changed, and they also flashed away one after another, fearing they would be a step too late. Because they were all very clear about the truth revealed by that ancient prophecy. They didn't need to run faster than the lion, they just needed to run faster than everyone else. Ember watched them suddenly appear and then suddenly disappear, and chuckled in surprise. Since you've come, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Ember shook his head, gently clenched his right hand, holding the soul-calling bell in his palm. Ding-a-ling. Under the red moon, the clear ringing of the bell echoing in the empty environment actually carried a hint of etherealness. And amidst the echoing bell sound, hazy white mist appeared one after another, condensing into figures. The headless knight holding a great shield and a long spear was the first to condense, and without the slightest hesitation, he pursued one of the fleeing sanguine. The banished knight wielding heavy twin blades followed closely behind, and silently, had already appeared behind another sanguine, swinging the 2 great swords in his hands, as if to cut him in half. Rutile, the headless knight, leader of the mausoleum soldiers. The Storm King's wings, banished knights, Ogre and Ingwil. Frollo, the hound knight, of the masterless mad dogs. Kristoff, the ancient dragon knight, of Lindell, royal capital. Lion knight, Oga, battlefield mage, Hugo. Rollo, the ancestor of the Fell Omen Hunters, Fallen Perfumer, Carmen, Black Flame Monk, Aemon. Finley, the kindred of Wrought Night, a survivor of the Battle of Ionia, the hero who carried Malenia, who had fallen into slumber, back to the Haligtree. And besides these, there were also 50 Silver Knights who were abandoned by the Dark Moon during the formation of the Dark Moon Knight Order. One knight after another condensed in the white mist, each pursuing the enemy in the direction they had fled. 11 demigods corresponded to 11 knights, a perfect one-on-one match, with no conflicts. As for the 50 Silver Knights, they were mainly responsible for controlling the castle, while also maintaining the city's security, to prevent anyone from taking advantage of the chaos. Ding-a-ling. The bell's sound was still echoing, but a faint ethereal blue light surged around Ember, enveloping his body and entering the spirit world. Ember had lost sight of the Mother Goddess of Depravity's avatar, but sight wasn't important, because his lock-on had always been on the Mother Goddess of Depravity's avatar. Ember briefly sensed the direction of the Mother Goddess of Depravity's avatar and pursued relentlessly in the spirit world. When he left the spirit world, before him was the boundless ocean. Thudashadow remained under the Scarlet Moon, launching an attack towards D. Although the Mother Goddess of Depravity's avatar had already escaped several thousand kilometers within just a few seconds by using the moonlight, as an excellent assassin, D remained like a shadow. Although D never found an opportunity to attack her, the Mother Goddess of Depravity's avatar couldn't tolerate someone constantly following behind her. That's why, after fleeing to what she considered a safe distance, she prepared to get rid of this trouble. But she never expected that just as she stopped, Ember had already caught up. The shadow, which was just about to activate her authority to eliminate that annoying assassin, stopped and trembled slightly. Even if her expression couldn't be seen, it was as if one could feel the frustration in her heart, as if she was shouting in anger. What the FCK, why? Chapter 250, a preliminary shot, ask all the questions again when guiding. On the boundless sea, perhaps knowing that escape was impossible, the shadow no longer fled blindly but stood in the void, confronting Ember. A soft, charming female voice, tinged with helplessness, came from within the shadow. Why must you chase me relentlessly? Ember didn't rush to attack, saying calmly. Then why did you run? The soft, charming female voice sounded a little annoyed, like she was acting spoiled towards a boyfriend. Why would I run if you weren't chasing me? Ember showed no mercy and retorted. Why would I chase if you weren't running? Quote. The female voice in the shadow was momentarily choked, and after a few seconds, a somewhat pleading voice came out. Can't you just let me go? I'm begging you. No. Ember spoke calmly, but before he could finish, the entity in the shadow seemed to lose all patience, and a voice filled with malice came from within. Since you won't let me go, then die. Before the words finished, the previously hazy shadow suddenly dispersed, revealing a crimson hue within. When the shadow completely vanished, her full form was finally exposed before Ember. It was a red moon. As the shadow dispersed, the red moon rapidly flew up into the sky, hanging high in the heavens. At this moment, everyone in the entire world witnessed a scene they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Above the firmament, 2 full moons hung high. One was the Scarlet Moon, and the other was also the Scarlet Moon. The rising, red moon, seemed to echo the existing Scarlet Moon, erupting with bright crimson light and greedily drawing more crimson light from the Scarlet Moon. This caused the light of the original Scarlet Moon to dim slightly, while the light of the rising red moon became increasingly intense. It transformed from a hazy, beautiful crimson into a crimson moon, concealing unspeakable horror and strangeness. The crimson light enveloped the earth and the ocean, covering the entire world, as if bringing some bizarre change to this world. Splash! The previously calm sea surface surged wildly, countless fish poured out of the water, filling the once boundless ocean. They all stretched their heads out of the water, looking up at the cosmos, forming a scene that drastically lowered one's sanity. And under the influence of the crimson moonlight, their scales burst open wildly, and the flesh beneath their scales was also contaminated by the crimson moon, writhing frantically as if trying to detach from their bodies. The previously gentle and cute dolphins grew sharp and terrifying teeth, and their flesh bloomed with countless crimson tentacles, constantly swirling in the air. Previously normal fish began to frantically attack other members of their species around them, both to greedily devour their flesh and to occupy more space, so as to be better illuminated by the crimson moon. And as they tore at each other, their flesh also detached from their main bodies, transforming into independent life forms. Predatory fangs and tentacles grew on the flesh, and they also joined this feast of slaughter. And under this frenzied influence, it seemed even the seawater gained life. The seawater constantly surged, waves smashing everything around, turning their flesh and blood into its own substance. It was as if the entire world had fallen into madness at this moment. All life forms were frantically devouring the flesh and blood of other creatures, turning into huge and bizarre flesh aggregations, terrifying and loathsome. And in this state, even Ember was slightly affected. Specifically, a bleeding debuff was added to his buff bar. This made Ember slightly more vigilant, as it had been a long time since anyone could apply a debuff to him. But if the incarnation of the Mother Goddess of Depravity, who was releasing pollution from the sky, knew this, she would probably be angered to the point of spitting blood. The most terrifying ability of a sequence 2 feet life giver, from the moon pathway, is to make the enemy's body activate and betray its main body. And for a sequence 1 foot beauty goddess, her appearance and charm are her strongest abilities. Even gods find it difficult to resist the charm of a beauty goddess. However, the former's only effect on Ember was to apply a debuff to him. And the latter was completely ineffective. Even though she tried her best to release her charm, Ember was completely unaffected. Quite terrifying, really. Ember looked up at the crimson moon above and then at the monsters on the sea surface that had mutated due to pollution and were constantly fighting. This kind of widespread influence is the most difficult to guard against, and this precisely corresponds to the Beander characteristic of a life giver, just stronger than a life giver. This means that this incarnation of the Mother Goddess of Depravity is likely equivalent to a Sequence 1 angel. Of course, her level might be slightly higher, but she has not reached the Sequence 0 level, otherwise Ember would also have a reaction. After all, just as the quality of demigods and angels as fuel is completely different, the gap between angels and true gods is also like heaven and earth. And being higher than Sequence 1, but not reaching the Sequence 0 level. Either she possesses two Sequence 1 Beander characteristics, or she possesses the uniqueness of the moon pathway. So, Ember slowly raised his right hand, and a shining sunlight spear slowly condensed in his hand. It was thrown towards the sky like a javelin. Bang! The sunlight spear streaked across the sky, tearing through the void in the blink of an eye and arriving above the firmament, in front of the crimson moon that was emitting crimson light. The crimson moon also seemed to sense the danger, and the crimson light it released almost solidified, forming an impenetrable barrier in front of her. But this barrier was easily pierced by the sunlight spear, like a paper window. Amidst the crisp shattering sound like breaking glass, a golden lightning instantly pierced through the crimson orb hanging high in the heavens. Sizzle. Under the gaze of the entire world, the crimson moon was pierced by a golden lightning. Compared to the enormous moon, the lightning seemed too small, like a single hair on a cow. But the light was so dazzling, like a solar flare on the sun, even obscuring the sun's own light. And at this moment, it was like this: the tiny golden light was far more dazzling than the crimson light that covered the sky. The crimson moonlight kept pressing inward, trying to engulf the tiny spear, but any crimson that came near was bound to be shattered, and even turned into a part of its power. Within the seemingly unchanging chaos and disorder of the crimson, the golden light representing order gradually gained the upper hand, turning into streaks of golden lightning that covered the surface of the crimson moon. The lightning streaks then connected into one body, occupying 1/3 of the crimson moon's surface. But gradually, the crimson moon seemed to fight back fiercely, the crimson light intensifying. Gradually, more and more golden light was covered by the crimson, and both sides seemed to be in a long stalemate at this moment. Although the golden came fiercely, it was ultimately water without a source. In the long run, the crimson would eventually win. The incarnation of the Mother Goddess of Depravity thought so, until another sunlight spear pierced through the golden and crimson orb in the sky, piercing through the brilliant crimson. As if planting another anchor point, the brilliant golden light once again occupied 1/3 of the moon. And on the sea surface, golden light slowly condensed into a spear in Ember's hand. There's nothing one sunlight spear can't solve. If there is, then just use another one. Bang! One sunlight spear after another successively pierced the surface of the crimson moon, planting countless anchor points on it. And centered around these anchor points, golden lightning spread rapidly, connecting into patches, completely enveloping the crimson moon. The crimson light was obscured, and a golden sun then hung high in the sky. And beside that golden sun was a dim scarlet moon, as if recreating the wondrous sight of the sun and moon shining together at this moment. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Under the light of the sun, faint streaks of red light could be seen erupting from within, brief like the water spouts emitted by whales leaping out of the water, struggling for breath in agonizing suffocation. But one sunlight spear after another pierced into it, filling those crimson gaps. Until no trace of crimson light could penetrate, until the golden sunlight became increasingly intense. Bang! The sun seemed to have reached its extreme brilliance, and the submerged, crimson moon seemed unable to bear this brilliance any longer, swelling and exploding, turning into scattered golden light that showered upon this world. The world, which was originally in night, was bathed in golden light at this moment. Compared to this, the scarlet moon seemed dim and lifeless. Open black lens bracket, moon, uniqueness x1 close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket beauty goddess, Beander characteristic, x1 close black lens bracket. Uniqueness. Ember looked up, rubbing his chin, as if he understood something. So this so-called incarnation of the mother goddess of depravity is actually the activated uniqueness. Does this mean that the uniqueness of the moon pathway, and even the entire moon pathway, originally belonged to the mother goddess of depravity? It's not impossible, and the possibility is even high. Ember withdrew his gaze and glanced at the sea surface below. The originally blue sea was now covered in crimson, stained red by the blood of the marine creatures. Although the crimson moon was no longer there, the pollution she left behind would not disappear out of thin air. Other parts of the world might not be too affected, but as the target of the crimson moon, Ember bore the brunt of the pollution. Although he himself was unaffected, the ordinary marine creatures around him suffered. The polluted marine creatures continued to bite each other's flesh, and terrifying monsters were born one after another. They floated on the sea surface like mountains of flesh, waving tentacles and preying on all life around them. Although none of this had anything to do with Ember, he still felt he should clean it up a bit. Just as he was thinking, a crimson tentacle suddenly surged out from beneath the sea surface, attacking Ember above. But before the tentacle touched Ember, a dazzling white light erupted from within Ember's body. Bang! The white light rapidly expanded and spread, centered around Ember, covering thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye. The sea surface disappeared, leaving only Aosphere, emitting brilliant white light. And everything within the range covered by the white light had long been engulfed by it. Finally, the white light, having expanded to its limit, began to contract, and eventually disappeared completely. But the things covered by the white light did not reappear, neither the mutated marine creatures nor the seawater they relied on for survival. Only a curved, 1,000-kilometer diameter, barren seabed remained. The seawater thousands of kilometers away seemed to finally react, pouring frantically into this blank area. Landenheim, within the half-destroyed castle of the Todbringer family. Although the upper structure had been almost completely destroyed, the hall on the first floor was still intact and brightly lit. Many people who attended the sanguine banquet, sensing something was wrong, had already left the hall to see what was happening outside. Facing this scene, Miss Lilith's expression was also a little surprised, and she couldn't help but murmur in a low voice. So fast. She had thought Ember would go directly to Lucius, since Ember's purpose in coming to Landenheim was to hunt Lucius. But she didn't expect it to end so quickly. She had thought that a major battle would break out between the two sides, and although Ember would win the final victory relatively easily, the process should be more convoluted, not ending so suddenly like this. How long has it been? The banquet isn't even over yet. Was Lucius too weak, or was Ember too strong? Olmer Todbringer heard Miss Lilith's whisper, his heart sank immediately, and he asked in a deep voice. Miss Lilith, what exactly is going on? Do you know these knights? Olmer's questioning instantly attracted the attention of everyone else in the hall, and Miss Lilith immediately became the focus of the entire room. But facing these looks of surprise, suspicion, or anger, Miss Lilith showed no sign of panic. Instead, she smiled and said, "Isn't it obvious?" Olmer felt a bad premonition in his heart and couldn't help but ask. What exactly do you want to do? Whatever she wants to do, capture her for me. Olmer didn't wait for Miss Lilith's answer, because Kaze's voice, suppressed with anger, came from afar. Before Olmer could react, the surrounding sanguine revealed their corrosive claws, staring menacingly at Miss Lilith in the center. Olmer silently retreated a few steps. In this situation, even he dared not continue to protect Miss Lilith. But he also didn't plan to attack Miss Lilith, because he always had an ominous feeling that made him dare not act rashly. But even in this situation, facing the threat of hundreds of sanguine alone, a faint smile still hung on Miss Lilith's lips. It was as if she had extreme confidence, or as if she was mocking their overestimation of themselves. Berlant Dracula, who was already standing beside Miss Lilith, quietly moved behind her, and at this moment, he suddenly burst out, reaching out to grab Miss Lilith's neck. But the next second, a blood-red arrow that came from nowhere pierced directly through Berlant's heart. Blood Moon Arrow. Olmer clearly saw that arrow, and his pupils constricted sharply. That was an arrow condensed from pure crimson moonlight, a Beander ability unique to a demigod. Was there a demigod secretly protecting Miss Lilith in the hall? No. Perhaps, Miss Lilith was that demigod. Olmer looked at the seemingly fragile girl beside him in disbelief. How could she be a demigod? Miss Lilith's lips curved slightly, and she said playfully, I don't plan to kill all of you, so please, don't act rashly. Just then, several tall knights wearing bright silver armor and helmets decorated with 2 long horns suddenly burst into the hall, instantly making the atmosphere in the hall even more tense. But these silver knights merely glanced over them indifferently, then stood guard at the hall entrance, with no other movements. They did not attack Miss Lilith, who was clearly in control in the hall, and Miss Lilith also had no intention of attacking them. Clearly, they were together. This discovery instantly chilled the hearts of everyone else in the hall. Chapter 251, This is for your own good. Landenheim. Inside the half-ruined castle hall of the Todbringer family, everyone watched the blonde girl in the center of the hall, who was squinting and enjoying sweet pastries. She was as elegant as a princess, yet only fear filled the eyes of the others. Because just moments ago, she had effortlessly condensed a blood moon arrow, killing several sanguine who attempted to resist. This even included the eldest son of the Dracula family, Bertrand Dracula. And at this very moment, more blood moon arrows hung above the hall, like the sword of Damocles suspended over their heads, constantly threatening their lives. They had no doubt that Lilith's threat wasn't just for show, any slight movement from them would result in instant death. Lilith walked up to a red-haired sanguine and said politely, Miss Alyssa, could I trouble you to bring my sister over? Okay. Alyssa Todbringer nodded silently, then turned her gaze to the blue-haired girl beside her and instructed. Elena, go bring that young lady over. Alyssa knew very well that as a member of the Todbringer family, the other party wouldn't easily let her leave. Although Lilith's question sounded polite, Alyssa wasn't foolish enough to take it as a request, nor did she plan to use this opportunity to leave. Yes, Miss Alyssa. The human maid with sky-blue long hair responded nervously and quickly left the hall. Lilith seemed to see through Alyssa's thoughts and said with a smile. Don't be so nervous, you know. I actually quite like you. Alyssa gave a wry smile. Should I say I'm honored? Ulmer, seeing them flirting with each other, finally couldn't contain his emotions and couldn't help but ask. Miss Lilith, what exactly is your purpose? Lilith turned her head to look at him and said frankly. You shouldn't ask me that question, because I don't know either. This answer stunned everyone in the hall. If you don't know, who does? Are you not the mastermind behind all of this? Compared to the confusion of others, Ulmer suddenly had a realization upon hearing this. Yes, how could she know? Although she was a demigod and could easily kill everyone in the hall, there were 11 demigods in Landenheim, and 1 true god. If there was only 1 mere demigod, how much trouble could she cause? And this attack was clearly not aimed at them, ordinary sanguine who weren't even demigods. After all, for the patriarchs of the 12 families, neither the eldest son nor the second son held any significance. It was they who wanted to inherit the blood essence of the 12 family patriarchs, not the 12 family patriarchs begging them to inherit. The attack on Landenheim could only be aimed at the patriarchs of the 12 families, at those demigods, and even that god, the ruler of Landenheim, their father, Lucius Todbringer. Behind all of this, there must be other planners. And now, Lucius still hadn't shown up to stop Lilith, and even the patriarchs of the other 11 families were nowhere to be seen. Did this mean they had all met with misfortune? The more Ulmer thought about it, the more he felt a chilling fear, and cold sweat kept seeping from his forehead. Just then, footsteps came from outside the hall, attracting everyone's attention. In the corridor outside the hall, 2 figures, one large and one small, were walking towards the hall. They were Elena and Ornia. The maid with sky-blue hair was looking nervously at the 2 silver knights guarding the hall entrance, fearing that she would be killed by the longswords in their hands. Ornia seemed clueless about everything that was happening, a hint of confusion on her young face. They safely passed through the door guarded by the 2 silver knights and entered the hall. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Outside the window, a deep crimson glow appeared, and another scarlet moon slowly rose. 2 red moons. Ulmer's expression changed slightly. This was completely beyond his understanding. Even Lilith couldn't help but look out the window, as she had never seen 2 red moons hanging in the sky at the same time either. And at this moment, while everyone's attention was drawn away, a sanguine suddenly flashed in front of Ornia. It was Lucius's eldest son, Kays Todbringer. He wanted to abduct Ornia to threaten Lilith. In just the blink of an eye, Kays appeared behind Ornia, even crouching down in advance, attempting to use her body as a shield while abducting her, thereby making Lilith hesitant and afraid to rashly attack him. However, despite considering everything, when he flashed behind Ornia, before he could even begin to act, Ornia suddenly disappeared from his sight. Kays's pupils constricted sharply, but before he could figure out what was going on, a blood moon arrow pierced through his body. Crack! Just then, Kay's body suddenly became ethereal, tinged with light red, and transformed into a hazy moonlight. This moonlight instantly shattered, turning into pieces of red scales that dissipated on the spot. Moonlight transformation. This was a Beyonder ability only possessed by a Sequence 5 Scarlet Scholar of the Moon pathway. Although things happened unexpectedly for Kay's, his survival instinct still made him use the Moonlight transformation Beyonder ability to evade this fatal blow. Kay's body quickly reformed in the distance. At this moment, he had appeared outside the hall, covered by the moonlight. He no longer attempted to abduct Ornia. Possessing the same flash ability meant Ornia had strength equal to his. Kay's wasn't arrogant enough to abduct a sanguine of equal strength to himself. So, the moment his plan failed, escaping became his only option. Kay's figure kept flashing under the moonlight, appearing further away with each flash. With just one flash, he had already left the inner city area and arrived in the outer city. Under the illumination of the two scarlet moons, his ability was greatly amplified. Suddenly, at the edge of Kay's vision, a striking silver appeared. That silver shimmer, under the light of the scarlet moons, was like a fierce beast lurking in the darkness, choosing its prey. Kay's expression changed slightly, and he instinctively flashed to evade, his figure disappearing again. And this time, he had reached the wall of the outer city. With just one more flash, he could leave Toddbringer. But at this moment, a whistling wind suddenly came from beside Kay's ear. He didn't even have time to turn around and see what it was, nor did he have time to flash, when he felt a sharp pain throughout his body. Bang! Accompanied by a massive booming explosion, Kay's body was violently nailed to the wall by a dragon-hunting arrow. His heart, along with his entire body, was pierced through, turning into a bloody mess that dripped down along his sliding legs with a squelching sound. His head flew high, still showing the joy of almost escaping. Even though Kay's was a sanguine, possessing powerful vitality and recovery abilities. But the moment his heart was pierced, death became his inevitable end. Lilith looked in the direction Kay's had left, with deep confusion in her eyes, and murmured to herself. Where did he get the confidence to escape from a demigod? I want to know too. Ulmer thought silently in his heart. The gap between a demigod and sanguine below the demigod level was like heaven and earth. Even if all the sanguine in the hall combined, they would not be Lilith's match. Of course, if they were all fearless of death and chose to scatter and escape, then perhaps a small portion might have a chance of escaping the pursuit, but only a very small portion. And this portion was limited only to the rightful heirs of the 12 families, because only they possessed the Flash Beyonder ability and had a certain chance of escaping from Lilith. But this was only in theory. Most sanguine did not possess the Beyonder ability to flash under moonlight, nor would they willingly sacrifice themselves for the survival of others. Kay's actions were undoubtedly foolish, and his end was the best proof. At least neither Ulmer nor Alyssa had any intention of resisting, because that might still give them a chance to survive. While everyone was stunned, another anomaly occurred outside the window. One of the scarlet moons suddenly absorbed the light of the other scarlet moon, and the light it emitted turned into a dazzling crimson. But not long after, a brilliant golden light pierced through that crimson moon. Followed by the second, the third, countless shining golden spears successively pierced through the crimson moon, until that crimson moon emitting a dazzling crimson light was stained gold, until the night was turned into day. The entire world, illuminated by the shining golden light, was as bright as day. But all of this didn't last long, because that sun exploded with a roar the next second, turning into golden light particles that scattered all over the world. In the sky, only one scarlet moon remained hanging in the sky. And even now, the sanguine of Landenheim still didn't understand what was going on. Why did another scarlet moon suddenly appear in the sky? And why did that extra scarlet moon suddenly explode? All of this turned into a big question mark, deeply imprinted in their minds. They had always thought of themselves as favored by heaven, possessing the most noble bloodline in the entire world. But today, one change after another completely shattered their pride, leaving only confusion in their hearts. Ulmer looked at Lilith, trying to get an answer from her. But soon, his peripheral vision saw a faint ethereal blue light appear in the hall. That faint ethereal blue light seemed to construct a door connecting two worlds, standing there quietly. Until a figure passed through the door, returning to reality from another world. Ulmer almost subconsciously observed the other person's appearance, and his pupils immediately constricted, because he recognized that this man was Lilith's missing blood servants. What in the world is going on? Cold sweat seeped from Ulmer's forehead again. Even a fool could see that this man was far more than just Lilith's blood food. After all, blood food would not have the Beyonder ability of teleportation. One should know that even the sanguine had not mastered this ability. In Ulmer's impression, only the Phoenix race on the South Continent possessed a similar ability. This ability was even more useful than the Sanguine's flash, because the Sanguine's flash could only be used within the range illuminated by the Scarlet Moon, while the Phoenix race's teleportation could be performed anytime, anywhere. But even so, this man didn't look like a phoenix. Lilith walked up to Ember and asked softly, "How are things? You're not injured, are you?" "It's resolved," Ember replied calmly, then extended his palm, holding a scarlet moon emitting a brilliant light. "This is..." Lilith was almost instinctively attracted to that red moon, staring at it intently, and murmured to herself, "Is this the Beander characteristic of Sequence 2? It's so beautiful." She had only seen the Beander characteristic of Sequence 4, which was a gem that seemed to be condensed from rich blood. It was the size of a fist and emitted a crimson light, just like a miniature red moon. This was also a characteristic of the moon pathway's Beander characteristics. The Beander characteristic of each sequence had a blood-red appearance, and the higher the sequence, the closer its specific manifestation was to the scarlet moon. Ember denied Lilith's guess. This is the uniqueness of the moon pathway. Uniqueness. Lilith blinked. She had learned the classification of sequence and pathway from Ember, and had never even heard of uniqueness. Ember's voice remained calm, and he said softly, "To become a Sequence 0, one must have 3 Sequence 1 Beander characteristics of this pathway and the uniqueness. Therefore, there is only and only one Sequence 0 true God for any single pathway." Lilith frowned slightly, and asked somewhat confusedly, "Is Lucius already Sequence 1? Ember shook his head gently. He was only Sequence 2, but he was very lucky and somehow obtained this uniqueness. Of course, one could also say he was very unlucky, because he was only a Sequence 2. So not only was he unable to accommodate this uniqueness, but he was instead controlled by this uniqueness, which was activated by the Mother Goddess of Depravity's contamination, becoming a puppet of the Mother Goddess of Depravity's incarnation. Of course, the contamination in the uniqueness has been removed, just like the few Beander characteristics you used before. So, you don't have to worry about being affected by the residual contamination of the Mother Goddess of Depravity." Lilith hesitated for a moment and whispered, "You mean, this is for me? Otherwise?" Ember raised an eyebrow and retorted. Lilith mumbled softly, "But you just said there's only one uniqueness. There is only and only one for each pathway." Ember corrected the error in her words, and at the same time shook his head and said, "Besides, I don't need these things." Lilith pursed her lips, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. After all, since Ember could easily deal with the activated uniqueness, he was at least Sequence 0, or even above Sequence 0. "You don't want it?" Ember looked at Lilith's expression, deliberately frowned and said, "That's fine, giving it to Ornia is the same." "Absolutely not." Even though she knew he was teasing her, Lilith still puffed up her cheeks in annoyance. Chapter 252, High-End Game, Is It? Monday afternoon, above the gray fog. Klein leaned his elbows on the armrests, his palms clasped together, watching as streaks of deep red light illuminated and devolved into blurred figures. Then, he heard Miss Justice's cheerful greeting. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Amidst Miss Justice's greeting, the hermit Catlia, as before, maintained a calm, detached posture, not overly invested, seemingly still an outsider to this gathering. She watched Miss Justice and Miss Magician each take out Rosal's diary and enter the specific reading session for each tarot club meeting. Then, she cautiously glanced at Mr. Fool as if daring not to look directly, but still couldn't see more through the peculiar gray fog. Only the clearly materialized clothes were reflected in her deep purple eyes. Klein held the few pages of Rosal's diary, his gaze sweeping over them one by one, feeling a bit disappointed. He didn't know when it started, but the value of the diaries provided by Miss Justice and Miss Magician was getting lower and lower. But Klein could understand the reasons for this situation. On one hand, the Tarot Club was growing a little too fast, and on the other hand, a large portion of Rosal the Great's diaries were inherently not very informative. For example, the diaries recording the period right after Rosal the Great transmigrated were basically all related to orgies. Of course, Klein had another guess. Up until now, he had almost never seen a diary written by Rosal after he became a demigod. There were two possibilities for this. Either Rosal the Great rarely wrote diaries after becoming a demigod, or Rosal the Great continued to write diaries after becoming a demigod, but this part of the diary was hidden by someone or even several people with intentions. If it was the former, it made sense. Because based on the diaries Klein had collected so far, the time Rosal the Great became a demigod was very close to the time he launched a coup, overthrew the rule of the Sorin family, and established the Indus Republic. So when Rosal the Great was the administrator of the Indus Republic, he might have been too busy with state affairs to spare the extra energy to write the playful diaries he wrote when he was young and ignorant. If this was the reason, although Klein felt a bit regretful that he couldn't continue to benefit from Rosal the Great, it wasn't unacceptable. But if it was the latter, if someone was indeed deliberately collecting Rosal the Great's diaries after he became a demigod and preventing their circulation, did that mean there were others besides him who understood Chinese? Were there other transmigrators? Klein suppressed the urge to raise his hand and rub his temples, his mood turning somewhat bad. Because in Klein's mind, the second guess was clearly a worse outcome, but the possibility was greater than the first guess. And having other transmigrators besides him and Rosal the Great wasn't that surprising. After all, even a transferring fire-like ember appeared before him in person. What was a mere transmigrator? Klein made the diary in his palm disappear, leaned back against the chair, and said in a normal tone. "You can begin." Justice Audrey looked thoughtfully at son, Derek. Since Mr. Fool was still reading, Derek had been quite anxious. It seemed that something major had happened in the City of Silver again, so he was also waiting for the other party to describe the changes that had occurred in the City of Silver at this time. Anderson, Derek did not disappoint her expectations. Before anyone else could speak, he said sincerely. Elder Lovia has been released. I met her in the library. Shepherd Lovia was investigated and imprisoned because her entire team was contaminated by the true creator. But now, she appeared in the library, in Derek's sight. And she didn't escape, she was released by the 6-member council. Alger thought for a moment and then asked, "Has your chief returned to the City of Silver?" "Yes, just recently." Son, Derek was quite surprised by Mr. Hangman's accurate guess. At this moment, Magician Furs, who had been listening quietly, suddenly had an idea based on the information she had previously learned. "Mr. Sun, could it be this situation? Your chief took the exploration team and that little boy Jack to find the path that leads to the outside world, and discovered that it must rely on the power of the true creator. So, for the sake of the entire City of Silver, after your chief returned, he decided to release Shepherd Lovia." Sun was stunned for a moment and felt that what Magician said made a lot of sense, but he still looked worried. "But, will this cause our City of Silver to be destroyed by the fallen creator?" "Indeed." The moon remained silent, but he nodded in agreement in his heart. In his opinion, the chief of the City of Silver's actions were like walking a tightrope 10,000 meters high. A slight mistake would lead to a fall into the abyss, not only destroying himself but also causing the entire City of Silver to be doomed. "Mr. Sun," Justice Audrey suddenly spoke, "actually, have you ever considered a possibility? That is, Elder Lovia is really fine." "How is that possible?" Sun subconsciously retorted. Hangman Alger also felt it was unlikely, but he didn't rush to speak and prepared to listen to Miss Justice's reasons. Justice Audrey carefully considered her words and said softly, "Mr. Sun, you may not have heard of it, but Rosal the Great once said a sentence, judge by actions, not intentions. At least so far, that Elder Lovia has not done anything detrimental to the City of Silver. On the contrary, her existence has brought quite a few benefits to the City of Silver." Son, Derek opened his mouth, but in the end, he did not refute, because this was an undeniable fact. Although Elder Lovia was only Sequence 5, her strength was comparable to a Sequence 4 demigod, and she had solved countless great enemies for the City of Silver. In terms of achievements and contributions, Elder Lovia was worth 100, even 1,000 Dereks. It was only because the other party believed in the true creator, an evil god, that Derek had always harbored suspicion and vigilance towards her. And Miss Justice's current words caused a hint of wavering in Derek's heart. Fool Klein nodded silently in his heart. The original text of this sentence is, among 100 virtues, filial piety comes first, judge by intention, not action, a poor family has no filial son. Among 10,000 evils, lust comes first, judge by action, not intention. There are few perfect people in the world. However, it is not wrong to use it here. It seems that we did have too many prejudices against that Elder Lovia at first. But she is a believer of the true creator after all, and many things may not be determined by her own will, and one cannot be unprepared. Miss Justice, Hangman Alger slowly said, I disagree with your opinion. Although Rosal the Great did say, judge by actions, not intentions, and although that Elder Lovia is indeed not a threat to the City of Silver at the moment. But if we don't pay attention to her because of her contributions to the City of Silver, when she shows a threat to the City of Silver in the future, the consequences are likely to be devastating. Son, Derek was stunned for a moment, and the wavering in his heart moved back again. Audrey didn't rush to refute, but instead nodded gently in agreement. Mr. Hangman Alger's statement also makes sense. Then what exactly should I Derek was a little confused and didn't know what to do. Before Derek could speak, Justice Audrey suddenly changed the subject and said, "However, all our current thoughts are based on the assumption that the true creator will destroy the City of Silver. But we seem to have never considered a question, that is, does the true creator have the idea of destroying the City of Silver? Or, if the true creator really wants to destroy the City of Silver, does everything we are discussing now really have any meaning?" Hanged Man Alger fell silent. Whether the true creator was an evil god or a true god, he was a genuine god, an existence comparable to the seven gods. In such an existence, if he truly intended to destroy a city, perhaps even the seven gods could not stop him. And did it really make sense for this group of people who hadn't even reached demigod to discuss a topic involving a true god so enthusiastically here? Even if he'd put himself in their shoes, if he wanted to kill his crew member Brooke, did it have anything to do with Brooke being good friends with his informant among the crew, Eric? Did it have anything to do with Eric's own will? The answer was no. As long as Alger wanted to, he could kill all his crew members without leaving any trace. Regardless of their own will, it could not change the fact that Alger could easily kill them. And from another perspective, if Alger didn't want to kill these crew members, it had nothing to do with whether he had informants among the crew. In the end, the decision-making power was in Alger's hands, and it had nothing to do with the will of any crew member. And if he, a mere Sequence 6, could decide the life and death of his crew members as he pleased, what about a god? "I think," Justice Audrey said softly, Son, Derek, perhaps you can try to communicate with her. Maybe you will have a common language, you never know." How could there be a common language? Son, Derek felt a little incredible, but soon he thought of himself. Didn't he pray to Mr. Fool also to save the City of Silver? Then how could Elder Lovia be much worse than him? The only difference was that he was lucky enough to meet Mr. Fool, while Elder Lovia met the true creator. But perhaps their starting points were the same, both were for the sake of saving the City of Silver. A very novel idea, and very insightful. Klein sighed in his heart. He had never considered similar questions before, and subconsciously placed the true creator and his believers in the position of enemies. This was partly because the true creator was an evil god, and partly because the true creator had once tried to descend upon Tingen, almost killing him and the captain. No, he had already killed him and the captain once. With such an experience, Klein naturally had no good feelings towards the true creator. And the members of the Tarot Club were more or less influenced by him, and naturally developed hostility towards the true creator. But thinking about it carefully, besides himself, have the other members really been persecuted by the true creator? Although the Aurora Order, as an evil cult terrorist organization, is indeed to be condemned by everyone. But there is no Aurora Order in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, and the true creator has not caused any losses to the City of Silver. Mr. World chuckled, his voice hoarse. Miss Justice, you seem to have grown a lot. Justice Audrey smiled faintly. Just went through some things. After a second's pause, Audrey continued. In fact, I also have some things I hope to seek Mr. Fool's help with. Oh. Klein's expression changed slightly, but he chuckled without showing it. Just say it. It's like this. Audrey organized her thoughts a bit, then slowly began. I have a friend, well, she is a Sequence 2 angel of the Spectator Pathway. Sequence 2 angel. The members of the Tarot Club immediately twitched their eyebrows. None of them were even demigods, and now you have a Sequence 2 friend. How could they offer any opinions? Klein's eyelids also twitched, and he felt extremely flustered. After all, he was just a Sequence 6 faceless. How could he give advice related to a Sequence 2 angel? Klein remained outwardly calm and asked with a smile. Are you talking about Karula? Yes. Audrey nodded gently and said softly. Karula created a large dream, similar to the real dream used by the Twilight Hermit Order to convene members, connecting the east and west coasts of the continent. And what is shown in this dream might be the past experiences of another friend of mine. And my current problem is, well, I encountered some difficulties in this dream. Klein's expression changed slightly, as if his DNA had been triggered. Fool tapped the bronze long table with his index finger and suddenly chuckled. Interesting, you can be more specific. Seeing that Fool didn't mind her disrespect, Audrey breathed a sigh of relief and then briefly recounted what happened in the dream world, finally emphasizing. This knight's strength is comparable to a demigod. Every time I enter the dream, I am killed by him, without exception. Miss Justice. Before Audrey could finish, Moon Emlyn White couldn't help but ask. This knight you mentioned, is he called Ashen Justiciar, Gouda? Audrey was stunned for a moment and said in surprise. Why does Mr. Moon know? Could it be that there are similar records in the Sanguine's history? Everything that happened in the dream was something that truly happened in past eras. Moon Emlin's expression was a little subtle. Actually, I'm also having this dream. The expressions of the other members of the Tarot Club became a little strange. Chapter 253, This is how the game is played. In fact, I'm having this dream too. Hearing Emlin's explanation, instead of showing enlightened expressions, the others became even more confused. What do you mean you're having this dream too? Are you having a dream together? Or does having a dream together make it last longer? Ashen Judicator, Gouda. Klein resisted the urge to raise his hand, his eyes twitching slightly. He had just felt a strangely familiar sense of déjà vu from Miss Justice's description, and the name Gouda directly confirmed it. The dream she was having was completely the story of Dark Souls 3 Feet. And this story was created by Karula, a Sequence 2 angel who also possessed a king soul. It wasn't too surprising that she could achieve this level. After all, even Will Osepton, an outsider, could establish a connection with him in a dream regardless of distance. An angel of the spectator pathway was even more skilled in this area. For example, the organizer of the Twilight Hermit Society was suspected to be an angel of the spectator pathway. However, Klein didn't rush to express his opinion. This didn't fit the persona of Mr. Fool. Well, the most important thing was that he couldn't be entirely sure that the Dark Souls 3 Feet played by Miss Justice and Mr. Moon was the same game he had played before. After all, he had only played a preset game, while they were playing a dream created by an angel. The difference between the two couldn't be explained in a few words. On the other hand, Audrey wasn't surprised by Emlin's answer. Instead, her eyes lit up. Because Karula had told her that besides herself, there were other players who had entered the dream, but she had never met them. Audrey asked expectantly, Mr. Moon, since you are also in the dream, do you know how to defeat Gouda? Quote. Emlyn, who was originally a bit proud, stiffened his expression, but still gave an answer. I don't know. Before he finished speaking, Emlyn seemed to be trying to make up for it, arguing. Not just me, no one in the entire Sanguine can defeat Ashen Judicator, Gouda, and no one can leave the Cemetery of Ash. At least I saw Gouda on my first try and died by Gouda's hand. Other Sanguine even died at the hands of crystal lizards and experts, and one even fell to his death without doing anything. Even though he was explaining, Emlyn felt that the other's eyes were getting stranger, and his voice was getting smaller. His face under the gray fog even turned a little red, because he had also experienced some of the deaths he had just mentioned. Initially, it was out of curiosity mixed with some contempt, curious why other Sanguine could die at the hands of things like crystal lizards and experts. So, he tried it with the thought of, I will not lose, and the result was self-evident. He was killed by a crystal lizard once, and by an expert 3 times, one of which was falling off a cliff to his death. That's nothing. Klein heard Emlyn's description and thought silently. He had died far more times than Emlyn back then, with all sorts of strange ways to die. However, based on their descriptions, it seemed they only had one life each time they dreamed. Once they died, they would wake up from the dream. They could only wait until the next night to enter the dream and start over. If this was the case, then based on the average record of Dark Souls players dying hundreds of times, it would take at least 1 or 2 years to clear the game. Although there were speedrunner in his previous life who could clear the game without dying, they were a minority, and before they completed the speedrun, they must have practiced hundreds or thousands of times, and the number of deaths might even be higher than the average. Moreover, this was reality after all. Although it was a dream, the difficulty was definitely not comparable to a game. Gouda was at the demigod level, so the Lord of Cinder in the game was at least a Sequence 2 angel, or even a Sequence 1. Well, Ludlith and the Farron Undead Legion shouldn't be Sequence 2. After all, the former was dragged back with broken legs and was not an enemy, let alone having combat power. And the latter relied more on quantity than individual quality. Only the entire Farron Undead Legion who shared the wolf blood were qualified to be the Lord of Cinder. But in terms of individual strength, they should all be above the demigod level. If that were the case, then the combat power of the Black Soul world would be quite terrifying. After all, the combat power in Dark Souls gets weaker with each generation. If even the highest combat power in Soul 3 is a Sequence 1 angel, then how strong would the combat power in Soul 2 or even Soul 1 be? Above true gods, is there a higher sequence? A bold idea suddenly popped into Klein's mind. Klein was startled by his own idea, but upon reflection, he found that the possibility seemed quite high. After all, there were real-world examples in this world, such as the legendary ancient sun god. The 8 ancient gods of the second epic were probably similar in strength to the current 7 orthodox gods. But only the ancient sun god was an exception. He clearly had the strength to overwhelm the 8 ancient gods, which meant that the ancient sun god was likely a higher sequence above true god. A true god is sequence 0, so is above a true god sequence -1. Klein's thoughts gradually wandered, thinking half-jokingly. Although sequence -1 was just his joke, the level above true god must exist. If converted to the Black Soul world, even with a rough comparison, the ancient dragons would at least correspond to the sequence 0 true gods. And the 3 king soul holders who slaughtered the ancient dragons are likely at a level corresponding to above the true gods. What about Ember? What level is he at? Klein felt a slight tingle in his scalp and didn't dare to think further, because he found that the truth was likely far beyond his expectations. Even if he stayed above the gray fog, he couldn't completely isolate himself from the troubles it brought. Klein's thoughts returned to reality. The Tarot Club members on either side of the bronze long table were still discussing the matters in the dream. Well, although it was called a discussion, it was actually the Hanged Man and the Hermit working together to extract information from the moon. As for Miss Justice, although she should have more information than the moon, she was a meander of the spectator pathway and was far more difficult to deal with than the moon. Therefore, the Hanged Man and the Hermit wisely didn't bother Miss Justice. Mr. Moon. The Hanged Man Alger pondered for a moment and asked in confusion. Miss Justice entered the dream with the help of that, angel, so how did you do it? The moon frowned, clearly a bit confused about this as well, but still explained. It was Duke Ulmer. Duke. The magician Furza's expression changed slightly. She had learned a lot of hidden knowledge about the Beander world from the Abraham family. According to the internal ranking of the Sanguine, a duke corresponds to a sequence 2 Beander, which means that Duke Ulmer is a genuine angel. The hermit Katlia clearly knew more than the others. She slowly said, legend has it that the Sanguine have a total of 3 dukes, and Duke Ulmer is the oldest of the 3 existing dukes, having once followed the blood ancestor Lilith herself. That's right. The moon suddenly became incredibly confident, raising his chin proudly. The hermit Katlia remained silent, not at all surprised by the attitude the moon displayed. Because the moon, like most sanguine Katlia had encountered, was incredibly proud of his sanguine identity. Although they usually hid their sanguine identity among humans, once their sanguine identity was known, they would act as if they had been freed from some kind of restraint. Not only would they not hide it, but they would also excitedly introduce the glorious history of the sanguine to others. Even information that involved the sanguine's secrets would not be concealed at all. Of course, it was also possible that these secrets, which were considered hidden by outsiders, were not considered anything in the sanguine. For example, in human society, most people don't know about the existence of Beyonders. Among Beyonders, most people don't know about the existence of demigods. Even most Beyonders within the 7 Orthodox churches don't know who their church's angel is. But among the sanguine, even underage sanguine know that the sanguine have 3 dukes and can even clearly call out their names. And the sanguine secrets Katlia knew came from this. Justice Audrey was deep in thought at this moment, guessing. Could it be that Duke Ulmer and Karula knew each other before? Not just her, combining the information provided by Mr. Moon, the members of the Tarot Club naturally came to a conclusion. The Sanguine and Karula, or the organization behind Karula, had reached some kind of cooperation. That's why the Sanguine entered the dream constructed by Karula, and the Sanguine even sent an angel to escort them. This was enough to prove the deep connection between Karula and the Sanguine, but it also made others more curious. What was the purpose of establishing this dream? It is currently known that 2 angels are involved in this dream, and perhaps the entire Sanguine are involved. After all, according to Emlyn, Duke Ulmer is only responsible for the Sanguine in the Backland area. Then the other 2 dukes might be responsible for the capitals of the other 2 major kingdoms. This means that perhaps more Sanguine have entered the dream. In this way, at least 4 angels are escorting this dream. Perhaps even the true ruler of the Sanguine, the legendary Blood Moon Queen Ornia, is involved. And this is just the Sanguine. Besides the Sanguine, are there any other hidden organizations participating in this plan? The members of the Tarot Club vaguely felt that they had touched a part of this huge plan. Even if they had only touched the tip of the iceberg, it was enough to leave them speechless with shock. Tap, tap, tap. The sudden tapping sound startled the Tarot Club members who were deep in thought, and they subconsciously looked up at the seat of honor. Mr. Fool, shrouded in the gray fog, was rhythmically tapping the edge of the bronze long table with his finger. Mr. Fool has something to say. This thought popped into everyone's minds, and their expressions became serious as they sat up straight. Regarding the dream, Klein slowly said, I can give you some suggestions that might help solve your problems. After a pause, Klein smiled and said, of course, they might also be completely useless. Klein felt it was necessary to give a warning, as his understanding of the game might be completely useless in the dream. But since it was related to a centennial plan, and had intricate connections with Ember, Klein couldn't just stand by and watch. Justice Audrey and Moon Emlyn respectfully lowered their heads. They didn't realize that Mr. Fool was giving a warning. After all, in their eyes, Mr. Fool had always been so humble. First, I need to confirm one thing. Have you tried rolling and parrying in the dream? Huh. Justice Audrey was stunned for a moment, but Moon Emlyn's eyes lit up, and he said impatiently. Mr. Fool, Duke Olmer told us about the rolling and parrying techniques you mentioned. Indeed. The Fool Klein's expression changed slightly, and he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. In the Dark Souls game, rolling and parrying are the most fundamental mechanics of the game, and they are the biggest trump cards that allow the undead to reach the peak of their lives. Even those speedrunner must master the use of rolling and parrying to achieve their speedrunning goals. If there was no rolling and parrying in the dream, the value of the information he had summarized in the game would be greatly reduced. The hanged man Alger asked in confusion. Mr. Moon, what are rolling and parrying? Justice Audrey hesitated to speak, because she also wanted to know the answer. Although Karula gave her 2 spells, she never told her about rolling and parrying. But there was no reason for Karula, as the dream constructor, not to know information that even the Sanguine knew. Undoubtedly, Karula did it on purpose. Emlyn raised his chin proudly. These are techniques that exist in the dream. Rolling, as it's called, is performing a roll at the exact moment an enemy attacks, which allows you to briefly dodge the enemy's attack. And parrying is deflecting the opponent's attack at the moment of impact, causing them to stagger, allowing for an execution and follow-up attack. I've tested both of these techniques in the dream, and when combined with the Sanguine's Beander abilities, their practical effect is quite outstanding. As long as you make good use of rolling and parrying, even ordinary people have a chance to defeat Gouda. After a pause, Emlyn added. Of course, it's just a possibility. Although theoretically even ordinary people could kill powerful enemies with the help of parrying and rolling, it was only theoretical. It should be noted that the Sanguine who entered the dream were at least Sequence 6 and Sequence 5, but even they found it difficult to kill Gouda, let alone ordinary people. As Beyonders, they could barely even see Gouda's attacks clearly. Ordinary people wouldn't even be able to pass the zombie stage, so how could they kill Gouda? Ultimately, everything had to be combined with one's own strength to exert the greatest effect, otherwise, even the most useful technique would only be a decoration. Chapter 254, Just a Guess. Indeed. Klein nodded silently, indicating his agreement. With dodging and parrying, it is theoretically possible to clear the level with 1 life. But that is only in theory. In games in his previous life, only a very small number of seasoned veterans could achieve this. In reality, in a constructed dream that replicates the past, it would only be more difficult. Take ordinary people as an example. Ordinary people have average physical fitness and coordination. Even if dodging can effectively avoid enemy attacks, just a couple of dodges would be enough to make an ordinary person dizzy and disoriented, not knowing where they are. Afterwards, they wouldn't be able to launch an effective counterattack and would be killed by subsequent enemy attacks. Parrying is even more difficult. The prerequisite for parrying is to clearly see the opponent's moves and strike at the appropriate moment. If an ordinary person can't even see the moves clearly, how can they parry? By luck. And even in games, the consequence of a failed parry is often a heavy blow to the head. Of course, thanks to the Moon and Miss Justice being powerful Beyonders, they have sufficient physical fitness and coordination to adapt to theocide effects of parrying and dodging. What they lack now is experience, which is why they have been unable to pass the Gouda level. So, if they could be taught some techniques, it might make things much simpler. Of course, the premise is that these techniques are also applicable in the dream. Meanwhile, based on their full trust in Mr. Fool, Justice and the Moon both looked towards the head of the bronze long table with anticipation, hoping to receive some practical advice from Mr. Fool. The Fool Klein also chuckled cooperatively and slowly said, "When you challenge Gouda next time, perhaps you can try to find a breakthrough from his right side. Don't rush to attack, and don't be greedy with your strikes." Klein stopped there, not going into more detail. Because Klein had accumulated sufficient experience in this area and knew the principle that the more you say, the more mistakes you make. The more you say, the more wrong you are. Just like now, he seemed to have said something, yet also seemed to have said nothing, being just vague enough. Right side. The Moon was slightly surprised, but quickly his mind became active, considering the feasibility. Justice, however, frowned tightly. She certainly wouldn't doubt Mr. Fool, but she was still thinking about the issues of dodging and parrying. Karula hadn't told her about these, which meant she would need to spend extra time adapting to these 2 techniques. As for the advice given to them by Mr. Fool, the other Tarot Club members could only watch. After all, they hadn't entered that dream and didn't know what they would encounter there, so they had no right to speak. Seeing that the others didn't seem to have any intention of continuing the conversation, the Moon Emlyn suddenly spoke. Everyone, I recently obtained some ancient history of the Sanguine from Duke Ulmer. I wonder if you are interested in learning about it. Klein slightly raised an eyebrow. In the past, Emlyn would directly include the Sanguine history he knew along with Rosal's diary. But this time he didn't do that. Klein initially thought he hadn't prepared. But it seems now that he wasn't unprepared, but was intentionally waiting here. He didn't directly submit the history he knew, but deliberately brought it up to ask the others. Klein's expression was a bit strange, because he had probably already guessed what Emlyn was thinking. The magician Furza's eyes lit up, and she was the first to speak. Of course, Mr. Moon, I am very interested in the history of the Sanguine. The history of the Sanguine is quite ancient, and some events that occurred during that time gave her considerable inspiration and provided her with a lot of creative ideas. Although these inspirations haven't been created yet, the Hanged Man directly said, I can pay the corresponding compensation. No need. The Moon Emlyn seemed to scoff at the Hanged Man's words, and said proudly, I'm not telling you this for compensation. I can tell. Audrey thought silently, Mr. Moon simply wants to show off the glorious history of the Sanguine. Your words make me ashamed. The Hanged Man Alger placed his hand on his chest, bowed slightly, and spoke with sincerity. The Moon immediately raised his chin proudly, looking as if his tail was about to wag into the sky. But Audrey's expression was a bit subtle. Because the Hanged Man had said similar words to her before. That time, the Hanged Man had asked for details about Duke Negan's assassination, and she, on the grounds that free exchange of common knowledge about each other's areas is the purpose of the Tarot Club, had not accepted the Hanged Man's offer of compensation. In that time, the Hanged Man had replied to him in the same way. But it's also different. Justice Audrey whispered in her heart. At least my information was truly just common knowledge, while Mr. Moon is purely enjoying the feeling of being flattered. Judgment Zio, who had been observing silently, also had a subtle expression. In some ways, Mr. Moon is even easier to satisfy than Mr. Sun. And just as everyone thought, the Moon Emlyn, whose vanity was greatly satisfied by the flattery, spoke voluminously. In the second epoch, humans had not yet risen, and the world was ruled by the 8 extraordinary races, giants, dragons, sanguine, elves, bizarre, phoenixes, as well as devils and demonic wolves. And the ancestors of these 8 extraordinary races were the 8 ancient gods. As he spoke, Emlyn observed the expressions of the others. When he saw that they didn't seem very interested, the Moon paused for a second and immediately changed his tune. This is all information you already know, so I probably don't need to go into detail, do I? Seeing that the others didn't answer, Emlyn took it as tacit agreement and continued. In the chronicles of the various races at that time, there was actually no concept of the first epoch and the second epoch. The beginning, for an unknown number of years, was chaotic, dark, and mad, lacking written records. It wasn't until the extraordinary races gradually gained some rationality and developed their own writing that living beings began to have some understanding of history. That era, when ancient gods appeared one after another, was called the Age of Germination by the various extraordinary races. According to the current calendar system, this period should correspond to the early second epoch. You should all know that the earliest extraordinary races, due to the miscellaneous Beander characteristics, were mostly tyrannical and mad, completely lacking in reason. Only the Sanguine were much more rational than the other extraordinary races and were the earliest extraordinary race to have their own civilization. Emlyn looked around and emphasized solemnly. It is precisely for this reason that much of the history of the early second epoch is only completely recorded by the Sanguine. Seeing him speak so solemnly, the other Tarot Club members had varied expressions. Although the Moon's words had the suspicion of gilding the Sanguine, causing others to instinctively be skeptical, no one interrupted Emlyn at this crucial moment. Because the longer Emlyn built up the suspense, the more important the history he possessed seemed. According to the historical records of the Sanguine, a major event occurred in the late Age of Germination. Emlyn paused, and said in a deep voice, 2 moons shining together. The Hanged Man's expression instantly became solemn. There is only one sun and one moon in this world, which is common knowledge. Although the Scarlet Moon occasionally experiences irregular Crimson Moon phenomena, the number is always constant at 1. It has always been this way for thousands of years. But now Emlyn was telling them that there was a period when 2 moons shone together. The hermit Katlia asked calmly, what was the other moon like? The Moon Emlyn glanced at her and said, it was also a scarlet moon. According to the Sanguine records, that scarlet moon appeared suddenly. Before anyone could react, it was already hanging high in the sky. And the moment the second scarlet moon appeared, the light of the original scarlet moon was absorbed by it, making its light crimson and dazzling. Any creature that looked directly at it would mutate and lose control, whether human, sanguine, or other extraordinary races, no one was an exception. The magician Furs couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Moon, how long did this period last?" If what the moon said was true, then this period was too terrifying. A crimson moon that could cause mutation hanging forever in the sky, and all creatures that looked directly at it would mutate. If this situation happened again, at least 90% of humans would mutate immediately, and the survivors would have to live on in misery. At that time, order would cease to exist, and chaos and madness would be the main theme. The entire world would fall in an instant. More importantly, this reminded Furs of her own experience. Didn't she also have the risk of losing control on the night of the full moon? The moon Emlyn glanced at her, pretended to be deep in thought for a while, and after a long time slowly said, 10 seconds. Ah. Mr. Fool, who was eavesdropping, was also stunned. Judgment Zio, next to Furs, suspected her ears. 10 seconds. Yes, just 10 seconds. The moon Emlyn spread his hands and said seriously, the entire process only lasted 10 seconds, or perhaps less than 10 seconds. Although he tried his best to appear serious, the moon couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was clear that he was very satisfied with the reactions of the others, even though he couldn't see their expressions. Why so short? The hanged man frowned and asked. Emlyn's face became solemn, and he said gravely, because it was destroyed by someone. Destroyed? Yes. Emlyn nodded slightly and said, in the Sanguine records, the moment that Crimson Moon appeared, a shining golden spear streaked across the sky and pierced it. Immediately after, the Crimson Moon was completely dyed golden. The crimson light was gone, and the dazzling golden light turned the night into day. The entire world also instantly changed from two moons shining together to the sun and moon shining together. Finally, that crimson moon disintegrated into golden light filling the sky and completely vanished. When Emlyn said this, his expression became serious. This event is recorded in the Sanguine history as the rise of the Sanguine. The Tarot Club immediately fell silent, everyone shocked by the information Emlyn revealed. One should know that the authority represented by the blood ancestor, Lilith, is the moon, and now one of the 7 orthodox gods. The Evernight goddess also has Crimson Lord in her honorific name, and the symbol of the Crimson Lord is the red moon. Even within the Church of the Night, the prayer gesture that has been passed down for thousands of years is to draw a scarlet moon on the chest. The former ancient god Lilith and the current true god Evernight goddess, 2 true gods in succession, have used the scarlet moon as their symbol. This is enough to prove the importance of the scarlet moon. And now Emlyn was telling them that there were once 2 moons, and one of them was destroyed by someone. And being able to destroy a scarlet moon that is sufficient to serve as a symbol of a god, doesn't that mean the person who destroyed it had strength at least equivalent to a sequence 0 true god? But even so, why would this event be recorded by the Sanguine as their rise of the Sanguine? The destruction of the moon, which is the symbol of the blood ancestor, shouldn't this event be called blasphemy for the Sanguine? Almost everyone's focus was on that moon, and almost everyone was thinking about the hidden meaning behind it. Except for Klein. Because compared to the moon that others were focused on, Klein's focus was instead on the golden spear that also appeared in the Sanguine records. A golden spear, turning the moon golden, dyeing the night into day. This almost immediately makes one think of the eternal blazing sun, one of the 7 orthodox gods, because the authority corresponding to this god is precisely the sun. And Klein also had a demigod-level mystical item, which is the Darkless Cross. Although he couldn't use this mystical item freely, he was well aware of its abilities. And one of the Beyander abilities of this mystical item is the Darkless Cross. Using it can accumulate light and condense a spear that is extremely pure, extremely white, and seems to be composed of pure sunlight, which is thrown at the enemy and expands into a miniature sun so intensely white that it can illuminate a city. This is extremely close to the image Emlyn described, just not as exaggerated. But the level corresponding to this mystical item is only demigod, while the existence that destroyed the moon is likely a true god. So it's normal for it to be a bit exaggerated. Of course, in the second epoch, this being likely hadn't been born yet, or rather, hadn't become a god. At that time, the one corresponding to the sun authority was likely the creator, worshipped by the city of Silver, which is the ancient sun god. Furthermore, there are indeed records of the ancient sun god suppressing the 8 ancient gods, so if he destroyed that scarlet moon, no one would be surprised. But Klein almost immediately ruled out this possibility, because the timing doesn't match. Emlyn said this history occurred in the early second epoch, but the ancient sun god first appeared in the late second epoch. And this immediately gave Klein another guess. Is it possible, just possible, that the spear was actually the sunlight spear? Chapter 255, What are the benefits of golden corn? Sunlight spear. King Gwyn's dragon-slaying miracle, and the strongest miracle in the entire Black Soul world, bar none. This thing is much more effective than some Darkmoon spear. After all, the appearance of the sunlight spear was for hunting the immortal ancient dragons. The immortal ancient dragons resided under the first ancient tree, existing long before the first fire was kindled. And just like the name immortal ancient dragons suggests, they possessed invincible, immortal power. Immortality is absolute for all things. Immortality is the first's essence, immortality is absolute, and the power of absolute immortality can ignore all concepts and transcend all existence. Neither gods nor devils could shake the rule of the immortal ancient dragons. If it weren't for Seath the Scaleless, the traitor, even Gwyn and the others would have been helpless against the immortal ancient dragons. But no matter what, the sunlight spear is a miracle capable of hunting the immortal ancient dragons. And isn't it normal for such a miracle to be able to destroy the moon? If it really is the sunlight spear, does that mean the one who shot down the moon is Ember? Klein felt he had vaguely grasped the no-flow of events. Why did the Sanguine regard the fall of the Crimson Moon as the rise of the Sanguine? Why did the Sanguine cooperate with Karula? All of this now has a reasonable answer. It's not that the Sanguine have a connection with Karula, but that the Sanguine have a connection with Ember. The Sanguine regarding the fall of the Crimson Moon as their rise might be because that Crimson Moon was the previous, ancient god. It was her fall that led to the achievement of Lilith, the blood ancestor. If we follow this line of thought, then Ember is the Sanguine's benefactor. And his act of shooting down the Crimson Moon will not only not be resented by the Sanguine, but will be held in high esteem by them. According to the records in Rosal the Great's diary, the original world arrived in this world at the end of the second epoch. Karula undoubtedly also descended at this time, riding Theshelter, together. At that time, perhaps the ancient sun god had already hunted down the ancient gods one by one, and Lilith had long since fallen. Therefore, it is unlikely that Karula had any connection with the Sanguine in the early second epoch, but if Ember served as a bridge for communication, then everything that is happening now would become logical. As for how they confirmed that both sides were related to Ember, Klein had roughly guessed the answer, which might be related to the first fire. After all, Ember couldn't possibly introduce the two parties to each other in person, could he? If that's the case, Klein's expression shifted slightly, suddenly thinking of the burning figure. Does Soul Ember also have this kind of use? After all, the essence of Soul Ember is also a part of the residual power of the first fire. Can he also use this Soul Ember to connect with the Sanguine and those characters in Dark Souls? Did Ember give him the Soul Ember with this in mind? Does he want him to use the Soul Ember, or to use the Soul Ember to get in touch with these people? Tisk. Klein felt a headache, wondering if it was a side effect of returning from the Black Soul world. He always felt that Ember had the potential to become a riddle master. Can't you just say what you mean? What's with all the hinting? Of course, Klein also knew that Ember probably thought, Mr. Fool, understood everything. But the truth is, Mr. Fool really doesn't understand. Sighing, Klein put away his thoughts and considered whether to test the Sanguine's reaction. And if he were to test them, should Mr. Fool negotiate directly, or should Mr. World step forward? Everyone. Seeing that the discussion was nearing its end, Klein was about to announce the end of the meeting when Miss Justice suddenly spoke. Are you interested enough in this dream? Interested. The hanged man narrowed his eyes slightly and said, Miss Justice, you might as well be clearer. Miss Justice did not hide anything and explained. Karula hopes that more people can enter this dream. If you are interested enough in the dream, you can try to chant her honorific name. As soon as these words were spoken, almost everyone instinctively looked at Mr. Fool. Because they all believed that this sentence was meant for Mr. Fool. For a god to ask them to chant the true name of another existence is tantamount to provocation. Of course, this is true for other gods. At least for Mr. Fool, he himself doesn't seem to care about these things. For example, Miss Justice both chants Mr. Fool's honorific name and devoutly believes in the Evernight goddess. Alger is both a member of the Tarot Club and a Beander of the Storm Church. Almost every member of the Tarot Club has other gods they believe in. In contrast, although there are many members in the Tarot Club, the only one who can be called a fool's believer is perhaps Mr. World. Thinking of this, the expressions of many members became a little strange. Mr. Fool. Miss Justice also looked up at the fool at the head of the table and asked softly. Can I say it? No harm. Mr. Fool chuckled. Just right, I also want to know. Klein thought silently in his heart. Miss Justice, having received the fool's permission, slowly began to speak. Her honorific name is, Dark Spawn of the Abyss, Forbidden Demoness of Jealousy, Recorder of Lost History. 3-segment honorific name. The hearts of the Tarot Club members tightened, and their expressions became somewhat subtle. Although they were not experts in the field of mysticism, as Beyonders, they were not unfamiliar with the common knowledge they should know. For example, they knew very well what a 3-segment format meant in other rituals. That represents, that points to, the 7 gods who oversee the entire world. Of course, the honorific names of gods often have more than 3 segments, but when chanting, only 3 segments need to be chosen. For example, the full honorific name of the Evernight Goddess is the Evernight Goddess higher than the cosmos, older than eternity, the Crimson Lord, the Mother of Concealment, the Empress of Calamity and Fear, the Lord of Slumber and Silence, but when chanting, only 3 segments need to be chosen. And besides the 7 orthodox gods, only those unknown, hidden, but equally powerful existences as gods can use a 3-segment honorific name. For example, Mr. Fool's honorific name is a standard 3-segment format, which is equivalent to Crimson Lord, Mother of Concealment, Empress of Calamity and Fear. And the members of the Tarot Club are now more or less in contact with demigods. So they have a better understanding of honorific names. For example, the purpose of honorific names is to point to specific existences. And the stronger the strength, the fewer descriptions are needed. For example, the 7 orthodox gods can be pointed to with just a 3-segment description. But if it is a demigod, it often requires a 5-segment description, and the last segment must include their true name. Otherwise, if only the first 4 segments are used, it may not receive a response, or even point to a completely different existence. Because in mysticism, the honorific name corresponding to each existence is not so strict. As long as the correct format and a certain description are used to narrow down the scope to be unambiguous, it can point to the corresponding hidden existence. This is why many cultists who don't understand mysticism at all, concoct some honorific names in a chaotic manner, but can still receive feedback. And Karula is neither a true god nor a demigod, but an angel between the two. This instead made the Tarot Club suspicious. Can an angel use a 3-segment honorific name as a pointer? After all, they can come into contact with demigods, and the honorific names of true gods are common knowledge. Only angels. They are more powerful, mysterious, and difficult to contact than demigods, but they have not reached the rank of a true god. For such existences, the Tarot Club has the least understanding. For example, everyone knows that there are 7 orthodox gods in this world, and there are hidden existences such as the true creator, primordial demoness, hidden sage, cosmic dark side, death, etc., who are equivalent to true gods, but the angels they know are few and far between. The Hanged Man slowly asked, Miss Justice, does this dream have any specific function? The other's heart stirred. What the Hanged Man asked about was the function, but what he was actually asking about was the benefits. Although they all believed that Miss Justice would not harm them, chanting the honorific name of a strange existence also carried great risks. And even if there was no danger, what could entering this dream allow them to gain? The reason why the Sanguine were willing to enter the dream was because they were protected by Duke Olmer of the Sanguine, and Duke Olmer would also give rewards. And Miss Justice, not to mention, she was personally sent in by Karula, the dominator of the dream. But for others, this not only contained great risks, but also had no benefits. Who would be willing to do something that has no benefits? Miss Justice seemed to have expected this and smiled. There are 3 functions. First, it allows us to accumulate enough combat experience in the dream without the danger of death. The hermit nodded slightly, noncommittal about this. There are actually not many opportunities for real combat in reality, because once Beyonders fight, it is likely to be a life and death struggle. And a person only has one life, no one can guarantee that they can always win. In the dream, however, one can die countless times and accumulate combat experience through enough deaths. And the combat experience gained in these dreams can also be of some help in real combat. Second, Justice paused for a moment, then slowly continued. Some items obtained in the dream can be brought out into reality. Things from the dream can be brought out. How come I didn't know that? The moon's expression was shocked, and he almost blurted it out. He was also in the dream, how come he had never heard of such a thing? Karula told me this, Miss Justice said seriously. Of course, she also told me that the prerequisite for all of this is to first defeat Gouda, the Ash Justiciar. Pausing for a moment, Justice continued. I have tested it, and these are real and effective. At least the magic I learned in the dream can also be used in reality. The moon couldn't help but ask again. Magic, what is that? Are we really in the same dream? It's the same dream, but can you compare to Miss Justice? The magician, Furs, muttered in her heart. Miss Justice is a pure insider, while the Sanguine can at most be considered cattle and horses, so they naturally cannot be compared on the same day. The hermit, Catlia, asked. Miss Justice, what is the magic you are talking about? Justice pondered for a moment and said. The magic, in the dream, you can regard it as a Beyonder ability. The categories of these, magic, are fixed, and as the dream deepens, the number of magic that can be obtained will increase. Beyonder ability. The Hanged Man's expression shifted slightly, and he was already a little moved. The more Beyonder abilities one has, the stronger their life-saving ability, which is recognized by all Beyonders. For example, the former Kilangos, although he was only Sequence 6, he could be ranked alongside other Sequence 5 pirate generals, relying on the many Beyonder abilities granted to him by the mystical item, Creeping Hunger. Just the fact that the dream can learn magic is enough to make countless Beyonders flock to it. Justice E.R. Hugh asked with some vigilance. Then, what is the price? Justice said frankly. Soul. A hint of cunning flashed in Miss Justice's eyes, and she continued. There's one more thing I forgot to tell you, you can gain a soul by killing enemies in the dream. And the price you have to pay is these souls. In addition, these souls have other uses. This is the third point I want to make, you can use these souls to speed up the digestion of your potion. The Hanged Man's pupils constricted slightly, and the sun's breathing became rapid. Because the combination of these three benefits listed by Miss Justice can almost make all Beyonders go crazy. Just by having a dream, you can become stronger and also digest potions. Where can you find such a good thing? This is true. Seeing that he finally got to something he knew, the moon said eagerly. Killing enemies can give you souls, like those zombies in the graveyard, each one can provide 20 to 24 souls. These souls can be exchanged at Lord Ludlith at the Firelink Shrine to speed up potion digestion. Ludlith. Miss Justice blinked. Is there a problem? The moon asked somewhat strangely. Miss Justice pondered and asked. Mr. Moon, do you know the Fire Keeper? Yes, I do. The moon said somewhat strangely. Ludlith said that the Fire Keeper is the one who serves Ember, but due to Ember's departure, there is no Fire Keeper at the Firelink Shrine. The duties that originally belonged to the Fire Keeper are also performed by Ludlith. Quote. Miss Justice hesitated to speak, but in the end, she said nothing. Because she suddenly realized that among all the people who entered the dream, it seemed that only she had her own Fire Keeper. And the others could only rely on Ludlith to perform the Fire Keeper's abilities on their behalf. But thinking about it carefully, there seems to be no problem. After all, Audrey's Fire Keeper is also Karula. Her intuition told her that Karula was definitely not a Fire Keeper. Chapter 256, Pray. The sun hesitated for a long time before saying hesitantly. There's one more thing, related to Mr. Fool. Justice blinked, and everyone else's attention was immediately drawn to the sun. They were all very curious why the sun would have something related to the Fool. Could it be that Mr. Fool could already influence the Forsaken Land of the Gods? How come I don't know it's related to me? Not just others, even Klein himself was a little confused. Had he ever contacted Little Sun privately? No, right, the sun asked somewhat nervously. Do you still remember Aemon? Blasphemer, Aemon. The Hanged Man frowned slightly and asked. Has he started to become active in the City of Silver again? Most members of the Tarot Club knew that the sun had once been possessed by Aemon and was saved only with the help of Mr. Fool. After that, under the guise of Amon's name and with the help of the Fool, he exposed the fact that the entire exploration team led by Luvia had been corrupted. Luvia was thus imprisoned by the 6-member council, and Aemon seemed to have disappeared without a trace, remaining silent for a long time. During that incident, Blasphemer, Aemon and the True Creator were also successfully portrayed as being in opposition to each other. Therefore, although the City of Silver wanted to use Luvia to find a way to leave the Forsaken Land of the Gods, it certainly wouldn't put all its chips on the True Creator. It would inevitably seek power that could counterbalance the True Creator. And the sun, who had exposed their plot and been possessed by Blasphemer, Aemon, perhaps represented another possibility. Yes, the sun said with a serious expression. Recently, many people in the City of Silver have been secretly praying to other gods, and it was later discovered that all of this was influenced by Aemon. Aemon. The hermit Catlia was a little surprised. She understood almost nothing and inexplicably felt like, what are they talking about? It sounds impressive, but I don't understand it at all. She didn't know why they were discussing the True Creator and Blasphemer, Aemon so naturally. This should be the Blasphemer, Aemon I know. This is not the same as the angel named Karula. After all, the status of these two is far above that of angels, even equivalent to Mr. Fool. And judging from their conversation, it seems Mr. Fool and Blasphemer, Amen are on opposing sides. What does this have to do with Mr. Fool? Magician Furs asked in confusion. Klein's eye twitched. His spiritual intuition had just given a jolt, and he vaguely guessed the reason. The son answered honestly. Because the god they are praying to is Mr. Fool. As expected, Klein strongly resisted the urge to raise a hand to his forehead. He should have thought of it earlier. Amen sent people to pray to him almost every day, performing pua on him. Where did these people come from? Wasn't it the City of Silver? With so many people suddenly praying to an unknown god, the elders of the City of Silver's 6-member council would definitely notice as long as they weren't stupid, especially since Amen hadn't made any attempt to conceal it at all, and instead seemed impatient to be discovered. Although as long as Klein didn't respond to these prayers, it wouldn't negatively affect him. But the current situation still made him feel the awkwardness of being forced into a social death in public. He hadn't intended to spread his honorific name on a large scale, nor did he have the energy to respond to everyone's prayers. Just the prayers brought about by acting as the sea god had already exhausted him. And most of them were just given a rough scan, unable to receive any response. The situation in the City of Silver was even more complex. He couldn't determine which prayers were traps at all. Or rather, except for the sun, the prayers of others were likely all traps. And what Klein couldn't figure out the most is Amon's purpose in doing this. If you said he was sowing discord, at least Klein thought it had no effect at all, he just felt Amen was bored. After all, this was a king of angels who could have infinite avatars. Before the fool appeared, Amen had already let his avatar possess a person locked in a dungeon for decades. For such an existence, a few decades were just a flick of a finger. He had plenty of time to squander. This couldn't even be called squandering. Amen, with infinite avatars, could do many things simultaneously. Mr. Fool. Hearing the son's words, everyone else subconsciously looked at the fool at the head of the table. The fool was enveloped in gray-white fog, his appearance was unclear, and he made no statement, remaining mysterious and majestic. This made others subconsciously think that Mr. Fool had known about this for a long time and had never taken it to heart. But wasn't this very normal? Since those prayers were directed towards Mr. Fool was naturally the first to know about them. But since Mr. Fool hadn't mentioned it, it meant these matters were simply not worth mentioning to Mr. Fool. The hanged man Alger speculated. This might also involve the game between Mr. Fool and Amen. Klein also knew he should make a statement and chuckled softly. Amen, just like his brother. Hearing Mr. Fool's slightly playful voice, the members of the Tarot Club felt inexplicably at ease. It seemed, Blasphemer, Amen was nothing in Mr. Fool's eyes and posed no threat at all. The hermit Catlia spoke carefully. The Blasphemer, Amen you just mentioned, is he the ancestor of the Amen family from the Tudor Empire in the 4th epoch, the creator's son? Yes. Justice Audrey nodded gently and explained. The former Time Angel Amen is also the current Blasphemer, Amen. Time Angel. The hermit Catlia fell silent again. The secrets known by the Tarot Club were more than she had imagined. After hesitating for a long time, the hermit Catlia spoke again. Miss Justice, what else do you know about Time Angel, Amen? She paused, then continued, I can pay a corresponding reward. No need. Justice Audrey smiled faintly, this is just common knowledge within the Tarot Club. However, I don't know much more information about Time Angel, Amen either. In the records of the City of Silver, that creator, also known as the ancient sun god, was surrounded by countless angels. Among them, the leaders of the angels, the 8 closest to the divine throne, are called kings of angels. And Time Angel Amen is one of them, besides, Red Angel, Medici, Fate Angel, Ouroboros, and Angel of Imagination, Adam, who is also a son of the creator. As for the titles and names of the other 4 kings of angels, we do not know them for now. Adam. The hermit Catlia murmured softly. She was not unfamiliar with this name. But she only knew that Adam was the son of the creator, not that he was also a king of angels. She had never even heard of the term king of angels, let alone the specific names of the 8 kings of angels. And now, the Tarot Club possessed specific information about 4 of them. Perhaps the strength of the Tarot Club members was generally not high, not even demigods. The highest sequence members currently were only herself and Miss Justice, a sequence 5 Dreamwalker. But they each had their own forces behind them, and their ability in information gathering was probably stronger than most demigods. What's more, even if their own strength wasn't outstanding, it didn't mean the forces behind them weren't. Miss Justice had the angel named Karula behind her, and Mr. the Moon had the protection of Duke Olmer of the Sanguine. The hermit Catlia fell silent inexplicably. The more she knew, the more she understood her own ignorance. When she first joined the Tarot Club, she still looked down on this organization somewhat. It was just because of the existence of Mr. Fool, this god, that she didn't dare to show it at all. But only now did she realize that the things she was proud of were simply not worth mentioning in the Tarot Club. This shattered her pride but also made her more clearly aware of her position in the Tarot Club. Justice Audrey sensed the hermit's emotional change but didn't point it out, instead continuing the introduction. Red Angel, Medici is suspected to have fallen. Fate Angel, Ouroboros serves by the true creator's side. Time Angel, Aemon wanders in the forsaken land of the gods, and Angel of Imagination, Adam. Miss Justice paused for a moment, then continued. He founded the Twilight Hermit Order, secretly influencing the historical trajectory of the entire world, and the Psychology Alchemists is also an affiliated organization of the Twilight Hermit Order. Do you have anything else to add? Justice looked at the others and asked. The hanged man Alger's eyes flickered, and he spoke slowly. I think no one knows more than Miss Justice. The others all remained silent, even the Moon Aemlin, who usually liked to show off, kept his mouth shut. This was because, regarding this information, they indeed didn't know as clearly as Miss Justice. Of course, Mr. Fool was an exception, this was everyone's consensus. Adam. Klein's eyes moved slightly. He had long suspected that Adam was related to the Twilight Hermit Order, but this was the first time it was confirmed. And the Tarot Club's attitude towards Adam was actually similar to its attitude towards Aemon. After all, Miss Justice, Ember, and the Psychology Alchemists already had conflicts, and Karula, as a Sequence 2 angel, was definitely in a hostile relationship with Adam, who was a king of angels, because they were destined to fight to the death for that single Sequence 0 spot. Compared to Adam, Klein was naturally more willing to help Ember, with whom he had interactions. Similarly, although Karula didn't have much interaction with the Tarot Club, she was definitely on Ember's side, and now she also had a close relationship with Miss Justice, so the Tarot Club would definitely stand with them. Of course, it was still too early to say this. After all, the entire Tarot Club, including him as the Fool, did not currently have the qualifications to participate in the game between angels. In fact, if it weren't for the Tarot Club, they wouldn't even be qualified to know these things. Perhaps the others also thought of the same thing, and the entire Tarot Club suddenly fell silent. And in this silent atmosphere, this Tarot Club gathering neared its end. With Mr. Fool's concluding remarks, everyone bowed and took their leave. Soon, only Klein was left above the gray fog. After the others left, Klein immediately materialized paper and pen. He wanted to divine immediately whether entering the dream would be dangerous. If there was no harm, even he, the Fool, would probably have to chant Karula's honorific name. For no other reason. The main reason was that this dream was simply amazing. Not only could it speed up digestion, but one could also exchange things from within. Where else could one find such a good thing? What's more, as the other members of the Tarot Club continuously grew stronger, Klein now also felt a strong sense of urgency. It couldn't be that he, the Fool, was still too far behind the others, could it? What if everyone else entered the dream, their strength advanced by leaps and bounds, while he, the Fool, remained stagnant? Even Klein, who had never had a strong desire to become stronger, couldn't accept that. On the other hand, he could also test in the dream whether the techniques he knew would work in this dream. If they did, it would undoubtedly be of great help to the exploration of the other members of the Tarot Club. Inside the captain's cabin, Catalia slowly opened her eyes and silently walked to the full-length mirror beside the bookshelf. In the mirror, her facial skin was fair and smooth, without any visible cracks. Her ears were normally small, with no signs of expansion. Her slightly deep purple-black eyes were calm and waveless, as if nothing had happened. However, Catlia's eyes, which held a hint of mystery, could see more. The eyeball-like flesh hidden beneath the skin that hadn't completely melted, the spiritual body where pain and madness were rapidly fading. Countless illusory things of indescribable form swimming around, sailors cleaning the deck several rooms away. Everything within a few dozen meters was presented in her field of vision without obstruction but in an unusually chaotic manner. Since the day she became a Sequence 5 Constellations Master, her mystery prior ability had been greatly enhanced, and she could faintly see layers of thick curtains like shadows around her. Behind the curtains, something seemed to be watching her, watching all living beings. In fact, if it weren't for Mr. Fool, she would have lost control because of this last time. And even with Mr. Fool's help, this was always a hidden danger, difficult to remove like a persistent ulcer. For Catlia, perhaps only by becoming a demigod would she have a chance to get rid of all this. And it wasn't that easy for her to become a demigod. And this dream might be able to help her. She was silent for a long time, hesitated for a long time. But in the end, Catlia still took a deep breath and chanted the honorific name of that existence in ancient Hermes language. Dark spawn of the abyss. Forbidden demoness of jealousy. Recorder of lost history. I pray for you to grant me a beautiful dream. Chapter 257, Farewell. The dream realm is not dangerous. Above the gray fog, Klein successfully obtained the divination result and muttered in a low voice. This result was within expectations. However, there is still a small problem. While the dream realm itself is not dangerous and even offers many benefits, the act of entering the dream realm carries significant risk. For a Beander, even while sleeping, spirituality can provide a certain degree of warning. But once his consciousness enters the dream realm, his body will be completely defenseless. If someone takes advantage of this opportunity to attack him, even an ordinary person could easily kill him. Therefore, it is essential to ensure someone is protecting him when he enters the dream realm. Duke Olmer of the Sanguine likely had the same reason for having other Sanguine enter the dream realm at his place. The same goes for Miss Justice, with an angel protecting them, they naturally have nothing to worry about regarding danger. But for Klein, who was drifting, alone at sea, let alone finding an angel to protect him, he didn't even have someone he could trust. As for the other members of the Tarot Club, their situations were much better than his. For example, the Hanged Man and the Hermit are both pirates, and they both have their own pirate ships. The former is a member of the Storm Church, and the crew members on his ship are likely no exception. As pious believers of the Storm Church, the crew members would certainly not attack their captain. After all, if something happened to the captain, the Storm Church would definitely investigate and assign blame later. As for the latter, being one of the pirate admirals, she must have absolute control over her pirate ship. With the protection of a whole ship's worth of subordinates, she also doesn't need to worry about safety issues. The Magician and Judgment are clearly acquainted in reality, and they can protect each other completely. As for the Sun, although he has safety concerns similar to his own. But he is in the forsaken land of the gods, isolated from the outside world, and it's uncertain if he can even connect to the dream realm. Of course, this isn't entirely without a solution. Because Klein still has his Miss Messenger, and Miss Messenger's strength is very high, at least at the demigod level. This was something Klein had already confirmed when he first saw Miss Messenger in the spirit world, seeing her massive true body in the Gothic-style castle. Furthermore, there is already a contract between the Miss Messenger and the contractor, which includes a clause stating that the Miss Messenger cannot harm the contractor's life. Therefore, the relationship between the two is completely mutually beneficial and coexisting. So, if he could get help from Miss Messenger, his safety would definitely be guaranteed. But the fear is that Miss Messenger might not agree, as their contract is for Miss Messenger to deliver letters, not to be a bodyguard. The contract only stipulates that she cannot harm the contractor's life. It does not mandate that the Miss Messenger must protect him in times of crisis. Thinking of this, Klein wrapped himself in spirituality, simulating the feeling of rapidly falling, and returned to the real world. Inside the hotel, Klein looked at the quietly burning candlelight, took a step back, and said, I summon in my name. Spirit wandering in the void, friendly creature available for dispatch, the exclusive Miss Messenger of Gehrman Sparrow. Whoosh! Inside the wall of spirituality, the wind suddenly became fierce, and Klein's semi-tall silk top hat was almost blown away. The candlelight flickered, swelling to the size of a human head, and became so pale it seemed to have lost all temperature. A translucent head slowly emerged as if breaking through a thin membrane. Its hair was light gold and smooth, its eyes were crimson like blood, and its appearance was bright and elegant, looking like a rather outstanding beauty. However, after the head fully emerged, what followed was not a neck, but a phantom hand holding the ends of her hair. Behind the hand was a dark-colored cuff with intricate patterns. Rhinette Tinaker emerged neither quickly nor slowly, still wearing that gloomy and complex black long dress, carrying 4 identical beautiful heads. Rhinette Tinaker glanced at Klein, and the 4 heads with golden hair and red eyes each turned around and said, No, letter. I have something to discuss with you this time. Klein put on a smile and handed over a gold coin. This is the summoning fee. One of the heads Rhinette Tinaker was holding bit the gold coin, while the 2 that hadn't spoken before asked, What matter? I might be in some danger recently, and I hope to summon you for help. Can you? Klein tried hard to make his gaze appear sincere. The 8 eyes of Rhinette Tinaker's 4 heads simultaneously turned and said, Can pay gold 10,000 coins. 10,000 coins, equivalent to 10,000 pounds. Klein's mouth twitched slightly, and he forced out a smile, saying sheepishly, I don't have that much money. Rhinette Tinaker's 4 heads spoke in turn. You can pay in installments. Installments. Klein felt a headache. Installments wouldn't work either. He wasn't entering the dream realm just once or twice, but every night. 10,000 gold coins each time, who could afford that? Rynette Tinacare seemed to sense his difficulty, and the four heads spoke again. You can first say what? Help. Klein hesitated for 2 seconds and said, I need to pray to an angel and enter the dream realm she created every night. And during the time I'm in the dream realm, my body needs someone to protect it. The eyes of Rynette Tinacare's four heads turned, and she said, 10 coins each time. Combat, calculated, separately. Okay. Klein immediately breathed a sigh of relief and nodded in agreement. 10 gold coins each time, equivalent to 10 pounds. That's only 300 pounds a month. Without combat occurring, 300 pounds of extra expenditure was completely within Klein's acceptable range. At worst, he would just hunt a pirate with a bounty of over 300 pounds every month from now on. And if combat occurred, although there would be additional fees, it would also mean his life was threatened, and any amount of money spent would be worth it. Huff. Klein took a breath and, without any concealment, began to pray in front of Miss Messenger. Dark spawn of the abyss. Taboo demoness of jealousy. Recorder of forgotten history. I pray for you to grant me a beautiful dream. Rynette Tinacare didn't speak, but the four heads with golden hair and red eyes looked at Klein simultaneously, which immediately made Klein feel a chill. What was going on? Why did it feel like Miss Messenger seemed to react to this honorific name? Did they know each other before? Rynette Tinacare's four heads slowly spoke. Where did you get this honorific name? From a friend. Klein tried his best to control his expression. Miss Messenger's reaction completely proved that she and Karula knew each other, and their relationship should not be bad, otherwise, Miss Messenger wouldn't have reacted this way. However, this is not strange. After all, the original world descended at the end of the second epoch, which was thousands of years ago. This means that Karula has been living in this world for at least thousands of years. It's normal to know one or two friends during such a long life, and perhaps Miss Messenger was even Karula's Miss Messenger before. While Klein's thoughts wandered, Rynette Tinacare was silent for a few seconds, and the four heads spoke in turn. Tell me about the dream realm. Matters. Protection is free. Klein remained composed, seemingly hesitating for a few seconds, but still reluctantly agreed. Okay. Good news. Being able to get protection from an existence at least at the demigod level for free, with the only cost being telling her what happened in the dream realm, was there such a good thing? Putting everything else aside, he was extremely familiar with this dream realm. Even if he didn't enter the dream realm, he could close his eyes and vividly recount everything that happened in the dream realm to Miss Messenger. Landenheim. At the top of the magnificent castle, which had been repaired, in the hall with a high dome. The golden-haired girl sat on the huge blood-colored throne that completely mismatched her petite figure, staring coldly at the young man kneeling on the ground below, his clothes messy and torn, his hair scorched, and said coldly. So, not only did you fail to kill that lizard, but you also lost hundreds of your clansmen. Sweat beaded on the young man's forehead, and he looked up in fear, saying, Ancestor, this subordinate deserves to die, but... Bang! Before he could finish speaking, the young man's body was suddenly sent flying 100 meters away, crashing heavily against the wall at the end of the hall. They are all dead, why are you back? Lilith withdrew her hand and said indifferently. The young man scrambled up from the ground, not even daring to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth, and quickly knelt down again in fear. Lilith turned her gaze to another young man on the right side of the hall and said languidly. Ulmer, I'm giving this task to you. Don't disappoint me, I will not fail the ancestors' trust. Ulmer bowed his head deeply and said respectfully. Since Lilith took control of Landenheim, the upper-level structure of the city had been completely shattered. The original 12 family patriarchs were all hunted down, with none spared. In their place were 12 newly promoted sanguine demigods. As the first to show goodwill to Lilith, and even acting as a guide to a certain extent, Ulmer unsurprisingly received a Beander characteristic of a demigod. Although he couldn't compare to Ornia and Alyssa, who ascended directly to become from gods, Ulmer was considered the most valued and trusted among the demigods by Lilith. As for you, Lilith glanced at the young man kneeling on the ground and said indifferently. You will go with Ulmer. If you fail again this time, you know the consequences. This subordinate understands. The young man nodded hastily, a hint of surprise in his eyes. Although he was also a demigod, this did not mean his position was secure. Because Lilith had no trust in these demigods, she simply casually selected 11 people to replace the original 12 patriarchs, implementing a competitive system. All demigods had to make sufficient contributions to the sanguine, otherwise, their positions would be replaced by others. And precisely because the former 12 family patriarchs were so prolific, there was a large number of direct descendants who wanted to become demigods. In this competitive environment, too many people were eyeing the positions of these demigods. Once they made a mistake in their position and failed to fulfill their duties, they were in danger of being replaced by others at any time. Apart from the two from gods and Ulmer, everyone else had to worry about whether they would be replaced tomorrow. However, the positions of those two from gods actually made a considerable number of sanguine feel somewhat absurd. Her Highness Ornia is Lilith's sister, so she is naturally qualified to be a from god. But the deification of the other one, Ulmer's sister Alyssa, only made them feel absurd. Because the reason she could become a from god was simply because when that lord asked them what names they would take if they became gods, only Alyssa seriously took the divine name of the goddess of life for herself. This was undoubtedly unique among the sanguine, who were actively avoiding any connection with the former god of life, Lucius. But it was precisely because of this divine name that she obtained the divine position that others only dreamed of. You may withdraw, Lilith said indifferently. Ulmer respectfully bowed his head and backed out of the hall, followed by the young man. After everyone left, Lilith's figure also disappeared without a trace under the moonlight, silently. When she reappeared, she was in a luxuriously decorated room in the castle. Ah, I'm so tired. Lilith threw herself onto the bed without any regard for her image, burying her head deep in the soft pillow, completely different from the cold image she had shown earlier when publicly reprimanding a demigod in front of other sanguine. Ember glanced at the girl lying spread-eagled on the bed and said, "Mind your image. You are the blood ancestor now." "So what?" Lilith lifted her head from the pillow and muttered in a low voice. "It's not like I wanted to be," Ember said calmly. "If you really don't want to do it, I can let Ornia do it." "No." Lilith jumped up from the bed like a kitten whose tail had been stepped on, bristling with anger. "Absolutely not." Ember couldn't help but smile, but said nothing, just took out a ring and handed it to Lilith. "What is this?" Lilith looked at the emerald embedded in the ring, which was covered in numerous scratches, and asked in confusion. "Sacrifice ring," Ember explained briefly, "it can bear death on behalf of the wearer." Saying this, Ember slowly extended his hand, and flames rose from his palm. Immediately after, a small ring condensed in the flames. The ring was semi-translucent, as if made of pale red amber. A blood-colored gem, about half the size of a fingernail, was embedded at its top, emitting a faint light. Ember brought the ring to Lilith and said softly, "This is for you. It contains a portion of the first fire's power, enough to support you until you become a true god." Chapter 258, Strategy Dog. "Are you leaving?" Lilith's hand, reaching for the ring, froze in midair. She bit her lip and whispered, "Yes." Ember nodded and said softly, "I have to leave sooner or later." Lilith said without hesitation, "Then I'll go with you." Although she was the blood ancestor, neither the sanguine nor the title of blood ancestor mattered to her. Perhaps the Dorothy family was worth her nostalgia in the past, but the Dorothy family had been wiped out. She had no feelings for the current Landenheim or the current sanguine. Even if she completely gave them up, she wouldn't feel the slightest reluctance or heartache. "No." Ember was silent for a moment, then said softly. Lilith frowned slightly and said unhappily, "What about Ornia? Can she?" "Then let Ornia be the blood ancestor." Ember shook his head and explained, "She will stay and help you." Lilith didn't feel reassured by this, but became even more worried. "You're leaving alone?" "Yes." "Where are you going?" "Probably, a few thousand years later." "A few thousand years later?" Lilith was stunned for a moment. She had thought Ember would say a very distant place. However, a few thousand years later was indeed a very distant place, at least Lilith couldn't find any way to cross time. She subconsciously thought Ember was tricking her like coaxing a child, even though she knew clearly that everything Ember said was true. He had never lied to her, at most he had only concealed something. Lilith whispered, Can I really not go with you?" "Unfortunately, no." Ember shook his head. Even if he could, he couldn't take Lilith with him. Otherwise, what would happen to Lilith in the future? A fragrant breeze assailed his nostrils, and the girl's soft body threw itself into his arms, accompanied by her low murmur. "Then, take care. You too, take care." Ember was silent for a long time, then gently embraced the girl. Dash. Clang. The tall knight swung his halberd and struck the shield fiercely, knocking Klein, who held the shield, back several meters. But facing this situation, Klein was not surprised but pleased. Indeed, it's just like in the game. The starting knight's shield has 100 physical defense and can perfectly block any physical attack. And Gouda's attack patterns are more varied and faster than in the game, but they are not unbeatable. So, there's a chance. The halberd whistled, and Klein rolled without hesitation to dodge it. It wasn't his first time clashing with a demigod. Theoson of God, of the true creator, who descended in Tingan was almost equivalent to a demigod. Because Thatson of God was a born mythical creature and naturally possessed divinity. But that time, it was only by relying on the captain's self-sacrifice and Saint Selena's ashes that they barely managed to perish together. And in Backland, Ince Zangwill had already become a demigod and had conflicts with his alias, Sherlock Moriarty. But Ince Zangwill had 008, a grade 0 sealed artifact, and his strength far surpassed that of an ordinary demigod. This was his first time truly fighting a demigod. Although Klein was currently being suppressed and hadn't even touched Gouda once, this was all within Klein's calculations. Acting rashly would only lead to death. Only by memorizing all of Gouda's moves could he clear the level with 1 life. Clang! Klein once again raised his shield to block Gouda's attack and skillfully rolled back to distance himself, hoping to gain a moment to catch his breath. Klein stared intently at Gouda opposite him and took a deep breath. Should I say he lives up to being a demigod? Although he wouldn't tire in his dream and had a knight's shield with 100 physical defense that could perfectly block Gouda's attacks, even so, under Gouda's fierce offense, he still couldn't breathe. And all of this was based on Gouda having no consciousness and only using fixed attack patterns. In reality, even Beyonders of the warrior pathway, in addition to their unparalleled close combat ability at the same level, would also use some Beyonder abilities with magic attack characteristics. In this regard, they were even more difficult to deal with than the unconscious Gouda. But thanks to this, Klein had now memorized all of Gouda's moves. Now, he could blow the horn of counterattack. Clang! He blocked Gouda's halberd again, but this time Klein didn't take the opportunity to distance himself. Instead, he charged forward, directly towards Gouda, behind him. The knight's longsword in his hand slashed across Gouda's back armor, but the next moment Klein suddenly rolled to the right. Bang! Accompanied by a sharp whoosh, the halberd scraped past Klein's scalp at the same time. Indeed, Klein stood up straight in the distance, his eyes narrowed. Unlike in the game, although he could still occasionally sneak in a strike, it was only 1 strike. Gouda's attacks were too fierce and fast, leaving Klein no room for a second strike. If he had been greedy for another strike just now, he would probably have been smashed into meat paste by Gouda's halberd by now. Is this the oppressive feeling of a demigod? Klein took a deep breath, feeling some emotion in his heart, but he was close to being discouraged. Being able to sneak in a strike meant that everything he had done was correct, it would just take a little longer. And coincidentally, as long as he didn't die, Klein had enough strength to wear down Gouda. Clang! In the following time, Klein was in an infinite loop of blocking Gouda's attacks, taking the opportunity to circle behind and sneak in a strike, rolling back without being greedy, blocking Gouda's attacks, taking the opportunity to circle behind and sneak in a strike. Although the progress was extremely slow, each attack could only slightly scratch Gouda's health. But after a long battle, Klein finally achieved his goal. Roar! Accompanied by an angry roar, the black substance writhing behind Gouda instantly swelled, completely engulfing Gouda's upper body in the blink of an eye. Gouda's right hand still held the halberd, but his left hand had turned into a huge pale claw. And his upper body, including his head, had been completely covered by the black substance. These black substances coiled around Gouda like writhing black snakes, forming a snake head, with crimson eyes, and bit towards Klein. Man-serpent. Klein took a deep breath. He knew that the real battle had just begun now. Because the second phase of Gouda would be far more difficult to deal with than the first phase. In fact, Klein had suspected this when he first played the game. The reason Gouda lost his consciousness was most likely because he was parasitized by the man-serpent. To resist the erosion of the man-serpent, the first phase of Gouda was in an unconscious state, unable to exert his full strength. But due to the undead's attack, Gouda's own state was severely weakened. And this was the origin of Gouda's second phase. Weakened by the undead's attack, Gouda was unable to resist the erosion of the man-serpent and was completely devoured by the bursting man-serpent. And the undead's enemy also changed from Gouda, who lost consciousness while fighting the man-serpent, to Gouda, who lost consciousness after being devoured by the man-serpent. It seemed similar, but in reality, it was vastly different. The former was still Gouda, even a weakened Gouda, while the latter was the man-serpent controlling Gouda's body. Roar! Gouda, who had previously swung his halberd silently like a seasoned warrior, now became a monster that constantly emitted angry roars. But correspondingly, his moves became even more fierce. Gouda, controlled by the man-serpent, could perform moves far more complex than simply swinging a halberd. His left claw and the crimson snake head on his head could attack Klein while swinging the halberd. Although Guda's health had been halved, the difficulty began to rise linearly. Theoretically, Klein should observe Guda's moves before attacking. But now he didn't have that much time at all. Guda in his man-serpent state wouldn't give him this opportunity at all. Bang! Klein rolled to dodge one of Guda's jumping attacks, then quickly switched back to a standing posture, carefully observing Guda's attack pattern. Unlike the first phase, the attack range of the second phase of Guda became wider. And regardless of whether it was the first phase or the second phase, circling behind was the best strategy. Guda from the front was almost invincible. Although parrying could completely counter Guda, Klein didn't have time to practice parrying and couldn't afford the price of failing to parry. So for Klein, circling behind and sneaking in strikes, which was both safe and effective, was undoubtedly a better choice. It's just that the way of circling behind changed slightly, because Guda's originally weak left hand was also strengthened into a claw by the man-serpent, and the halberd in his right hand became the weakest link instead. So circling behind from the right side also had to change to circling behind from the left side. And compared to Guda, who instinctively swung his halberd, the man-serpent clearly trusted its own abilities more. Therefore, its main attack method was to rely on the snake head and claws formed by the eruption of the man-serpent, rather than the halberd. This also gave Klein an opportunity. Bang! Guda, who jumped high and then slammed into the ground, had almost no pause. The claw in his left hand fiercely clawed at Klein. But Klein was not surprised but pleased, and his eyes lit up. Good opportunity. Klein rolled to dodge the attack, then quickly circled behind Guda from the left, and slashed once, twice. Theoretically, Klein could only slash once, and the second slash would be considered greedy. But Klein had discovered that Guda in his man-serpent form was far less flexible than in the first phase. So, he had enough time to get in 2 slashes. And what he needed to do next was to repeat this operation. Without making mistakes, consolidate his advantage as much as possible. And this, Klein had done many times. Clang! Accompanied by the fatal final blow. The man-serpent on Guda's body suddenly shrank back into his body, as if it had lost all life force, all shrinking into a ball. And Guda's body also fell heavily, kneeling on the ground, and looked back at Klein with difficulty. Thank you. Bang! Accompanied by a faint sound, Guda's body fell heavily to the ground, turning into a flash of white light and disappearing. Open black lens bracket Sol plus 30000 close black lens bracket. Klein's expression was a little stunned, but then a flame rose from his body. And in the center of the originally empty square, where Guda had been kneeling, a bonfire appeared. Klein looked at the sparks burning on his body, sighed softly, and slowly walked to the bonfire to light it. For Guda, death was undoubtedly a release. But no matter what, killing Guda still gave Klein a great sense of accomplishment. After all, this was the first time he had killed a demigod on his own. Of course, Klein knew very well that this was only in a dream. If he encountered a demigod in reality, he would only be completely crushed. After all, most demigods in reality rely on Beyonder abilities rather than physical attacks, and in reality, he neither had parrying and rolling nor a knight's shield with 100 physical defense. His understanding of other demigods also couldn't be as detailed as his understanding of Guda. If he encountered a demigod in reality, the only thing Klein could probably do was wait for death. Well, he could also call for help. After all, neither Miss Messenger nor Mr. Isaac should mind saving him. Shaking his head, Klein cast his thoughts aside and turned to walk towards the Firelink shrine. What came into view were 5 huge thrones, with a large number of candles placed next to them, looking quite warm. The only flaw was that Klein didn't see the Firekeeper. However, this was also expected. After all, in the moon's description, the duties of the Firekeeper were performed by the maidservant of the Firelink shrine. Klein looked to the right, not in a hurry to chat with the maidservant. Instead, he walked straight up the stairs and reached the 3rd floor of the Firelink shrine. Giant tree. Klein glanced at the large tree at the entrance and turned to walk towards the tower at the end. The door to the tower was locked, but Klein didn't intend to go in anyway. He looked at the roof covered with tiles on the left, then climbed up and walked all the way to the end. Below was the expert guarding another locked iron door. Klein just glanced at him and didn't bother with him. This one was even more difficult to deal with than Guda. Walking all the way to the end, an open space appeared before Klein's eyes. And in the open space, there was a glowing bug. Gemstone crystal lizard. Slap. Before the gemstone crystal lizard could escape, Klein finished it off with a single jumping attack. Open black lens bracket twinkling titanite close black lens bracket. Standing still and hesitating for 2 seconds, Klein returned the way he came, back to the roof. In the middle part of the roof, there was an archway. Passing through the door was the stone beam at the top of the Firelink shrine. Klein carefully moved to the center of the beam, and what appeared before him was a pile of scattered bird feathers and branches. Strange noises also came from his ears. Squawk, squawk, give me the beep beep. Squawk, give me the dong dong. Squawk. Klein looked up, and there was a huge bird's nest above his head. But the bird's nest wasn't well sealed, and occasionally light seeped through it. This works. Klein frowned slightly. So far, everything was almost exactly the same as in the game. But this made him feel a little strange instead. Chapter 259 Mermaid. Based on the details in his memory, Klein successfully exchanged a wedge stone fragment from the bird's nest using a flame flask, and exchanged a return bone for the iron gauntlets, the standard equipment of a Sun Knight. And on the other side of the bird's nest, on a withered corpse, Klein picked up an Estus shard. Opening the hidden wall, Klein jumped down the beam and found a treasure chest on the high platform behind the throne of the Lothric twin princes. Inside the treasure chest was a covetous silver serpent ring. Klein took a deep breath, feeling increasingly that this dream was not simple. Karula is a character from Dark Souls. It's not strange that she can construct dreams based on past events, but why is everything in the dream exactly the same as in the game? Perhaps only Karula herself can answer all of this. But Klein had a premonition: he might never see Karula in the dream, just as he couldn't see the Fire Keeper in Firelink Shrine. That's not surprising. Karula could become a Sequence 2 angel and held a king's soul. The Fire Keeper's sequence would only be higher than Karula's, and she would almost certainly hold a king's soul. Such beings would naturally not come to the dream to play house with them. Jumping down from the high platform, Klein glanced at Ludlith sitting on the throne. He didn't rush to talk to him, nor did he rush to insert the spiral sword, but walked directly towards the handmaid of Firelink Shrine. Oh dear, an Ashen One has arrived. This old woman, am the handmaid of this Firelink Shrine. Be it weapons, armor, items, or spells, as long as they are essential items to help you fulfill your mission, they are all prepared. Of course, this old woman, am also undead, but I'm not running a charity. Ashen One, go take souls, and bring them back. Klein waited quietly for her to finish, then spoke. I wish to complete the digestion of the potion. A hint of surprise flashed across the handmaid's aged face. Potion. Yes, of course. If that is what you desire, then as you wish, your potion will be digested. As payment, I will claim the souls you possess. As soon as the words fell, a flame rose from Klein's body again. Klein could see the amount of souls he had painstakingly accumulated rapidly decreasing. 300,000 souls were reduced to only 200,000. But at the same time, he also felt a sense of enlightenment. Immediately after, he went to the blacksmith, used the Estus shards he found to reinforce his Estus flasks, and allocated the Ashen Estus flasks back to regular Estus flasks. This way, he could take 5 sips from his orange juice. After doing all this, Klein talked with Hawkwood and Ludlith. And just as Moon, Aimlin and Miss Justice had said, the information they conveyed had no discrepancies whatsoever. Klein looked thoughtful, ended the conversation, and returned to the central bonfire in Firelink Shrine, inserting the spiral sword he had pulled from Guta's chest into it. Boom! As the spiral sword was inserted, flames suddenly rose from the long-cooled cinders in the bonfire. From this moment on, the transferring fire was officially considered to have begun. Klein prepared to continue exploring forward, heading to the high wall of Lothric, wanting to test his limits. According to his understanding of the game's content, he could completely light the next 2 bonfires, or even kill the ice dog and go straight to the undead settlement. But when Klein sat down before the bonfire, he subconsciously closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself lying on the hotel bed. Renette Tinakel was standing by the bed, the 4 heads she was carrying staring intently at him. At first glance, this scene was definitely quite horrifying. Subconsciously looking out the window, the scarlet moon was still hanging high in the sky. How long did I sleep? Klein frowned and asked. Renette Tinakel replied. 2 hours. Klein realized something: this was roughly consistent with the time he had experienced in the dream. In other words, the flow of time in reality and the dream is actually the same. No, it shouldn't be that simple. The moon explored for less than 8 hours each time, sometimes even dying at Guta's hands in less than half an hour. But each time he woke up, it was already dawn. Does that mean once one dies in the dream, the waking time is fixed at dawn? And if one actively leaves the dream, they can wake up earlier according to the time that passed in the dream. So, what if he continuously explores in the dream for more than 8 hours, or even 10 or 20 hours? When would he wake up? At dawn, or according to the corresponding time that passed in reality? I can try it next time. Klein silently kept this conjecture in mind. However, this is something for the next time he enters the dream. The most important thing now is. Klein closed his eyes for a moment. Just as he had felt in the dream, the faceless potion had been completely digested. Although this had consumed a large amount of souls, these souls could be obtained in the dream. Rounded up, it was equivalent to not needing to do anything, and being able to complete the digestion of the potion just by sleeping. But this doesn't mean that the dream is applicable to everyone. For example, it cost Klein 100,000 souls to digest the potion, which was 1/3 of the souls obtained from killing Gouda. As for the ordinary zombies in the Cemetery of Ash, killing one only yields 20 souls, and even killing all of them would only yield less than 500. In other words, assuming one cannot defeat Gouda, relying solely on killing ordinary zombies to obtain souls, it would take at least 200 days to accumulate 100,000 souls. On the other hand, to defeat Gouda, one must at least be a Sequence 6 Beyonder. Because Beyonders below Sequence 6 are severely lacking in strength, even with parrying and rolling, they cannot defeat Gouda. Even Sequence 6 is difficult, as not everyone can have such a deep understanding as Klein. That is to say, for other Beyonders to defeat Gouda, they would most likely need to be at Sequence 5. And at the Sequence 5 stage, digesting a potion takes at least years. Even with the blessing of the acting method, completing the digestion of a potion usually takes 3 to 5 years or even longer. For these people, the dream undoubtedly holds unparalleled attraction. And Beyonders who can reach Sequence 6 or even Sequence 5 are basically supported by secret organizations. After all, it is extremely difficult for a wild Beyonder to become Sequence 5. Neither the channels to obtain potion formulas nor the huge funds required to purchase them are something a wild Beyonder can possess. That is to say, the dream was originally prepared for these Beyonders who have secret organizations backing them. Or rather, Karula's goal is to attract those secret organizations to explore the dream. Klein vaguely guessed a corner of the truth, but it only gave him a bigger headache. Others truly have backing, but he truly doesn't. Will there be trouble if I just jump in like this? You were. A voice came from beside Klein's ear. Renette Tinakel was staring intently at him. In the dream. Saw. What? Klein organized his thoughts and decided to tell Renette Tinakel everything in detail. Of course, he omitted some details to avoid being asked why he knew the dream so well. I need to find a way to find the mermaid. Klein thought silently while recounting his experiences in the dream. Originally, the main reason he wasn't in a hurry to find the mermaid was because the faceless potion was far from being digested. So he planned to stay on the Rorstad archipelago for a while and set off after the potion was almost digested. But now that the potion has been completely digested, finding the mermaid has to be put on the agenda. Ordinary merchant ships or passenger liners only go as far as the Middle Sonia Sea, which is near the Rorstad archipelago. Because further east is the pirates, paradise, and even the military doesn't dare to easily enter that sea area. Only pirates would dare to take him into that sea area, or even deep into the eastern Sonia Sea. Among the people Klein knew, only 3 had this ability. Mr. Hanged Man, Hermit, Ms. Star Admiral, Catalya, and Iceberg Admiral Edwina. Klein first ruled out Mr. Hanged Man, because although Mr. Hanged Man's strength was not bad, he was ultimately only Sequence 6. Compared to the other 2 Sequence 5 pirate generals, there was a clear gap. And Klein had a premonition that his trip this time would likely involve going deep into the God War ruins, so the stronger his companions, the better. Between the Hermit and Iceberg Admiral, Klein was more inclined towards the former. Because the latter was known through Ember's connections, while the former was through his own connections, relying on Mr. Fool. With Mr. Fool's guarantee, the Hermit was undoubtedly more trustworthy to Klein. Moreover, in terms of strength, Iceberg Admiral doesn't seem to be the type who excels at combat. Of course, none of these are the main points. The main point is, being on the same ship as Iceberg Admiral makes Klein feel very insecure. Ever since the name he heard from Iceberg Admiral last time, he had already decided to keep his distance from her. On the other hand, the Hermit was saved by Mr. Fool and holds feelings of gratitude and awe towards the Fool. Klein didn't expect to control her through this, but at least with this foundation, the Hermit could make him feel more at ease. However, Hermit, Ms. should still be in the dream at this time, right? Klein showed a thoughtful expression. Pirate generals are not lone wolves, most of them have their own forces behind them. For example, Keelangos is backed by the Twilight Hermit Order, Blood Admiral is backed by the Rose School of Thought, and Admiral of Disease is backed by the Demonist Sect. That's why Keelangos was ordered to assassinate Duke Negan, and that's why Admiral of Disease Tracy could summon the demoness of Undying Katarina Pell without a word. If he hadn't also called Mr. Azik at that time, he probably would have died without a burial place. In addition, Admiral of Hell is likely backed by the Numinous Episcopate plus the King of the Five Seas. Star Admiral is backed by the Moses Ascetic Order, and Iceberg Admiral is secretly backed by the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Theoretically, these pirate generals are the best candidates to enter the dream. Their strength is all at Sequence 5, and they all have a powerful secret organization supporting them. Even Iceberg Admiral, she might have already entered the dream. After all, the one behind her is likely acquainted with Karula, the builder of the dream. It's not impossible that that party participated in this plan. Hiss. Klein's expression changed slightly, and he almost gasped. He had originally just let his thoughts wander, but the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it felt, making his scalp tingle. Since they all came out of the painting world, how could they not have connections? Karula is already an angel, and the one behind Iceberg Admiral is at a higher level. Then the strength of others is at least not inferior to Karula's. Conservatively estimated, there are at least 10 to 20 angels, and even those at the Sequence 0 level might exist. Furthermore, some of them possess King's Soul, so their true strength is probably far more than that. Even if they can't reach the level of the former ancient sun god, they are definitely stronger than ordinary Sequence 0 true gods. Klein's eye twitched, unsure of what to say. Never mind, these things have nothing to do with him. He should just honestly figure out how to advance to Sequence 5 first. In short, he should contact Hermit Ms. first. After thinking for a moment, Klein looked at Renette Tinakel, who was beside him, lost in thought about the experiences he had recounted. The other party seemed to sense Klein's gaze, and Renette Tinakel's four heads nodded simultaneously, then she returned to the spirit world. Waking up from the dream, Star Admiral Catalia opened her eyes and sighed softly. Just as the moon and Miss Justice had described, the knight named Gouda's strength was at least equivalent to a demigod. And although the advice given by Mr. Fool was effective, it made her increasingly in awe of the power of gods. But unfortunately, the knight named Gouda seemed to possess other powers. When he released that black, viscous substance, Catalia couldn't withstand it either and was ultimately killed by it. However, this was the first time after all. Catalia believed that with a few more chances, she would eventually be able to defeat Gouda. Just as she was thinking, Catalia's vision suddenly blurred, and she saw the pervasive gray fog, and the fool, sitting on a high-backed chair in the depths of the gray fog, looking down upon everything. She saw a figure with hands clasped together, resting against her face, praying devoutly. The fool that does not belong to this era. Please inform Hermit Ms. that I need her help with something. I hope to have a private discussion with her. The ethereal voice disappeared, but Catalia's expression became solemn. Mr. World needs her help. What could it be? After hesitating for a few seconds, Catalia still chose to respond. Establishing a good relationship with the members of the Tarot Club was not a bad thing for her. Of course, provided that this matter is not too troublesome. Chapter 260, Setting Sail. Amidst the undulating waves, a passenger ship with rows of cannons on both sides sailed along the safe channel, not daring to deviate in the slightest. East of Alavi Island, deviating from the correct route often meant disappearing, and even the pirates dared not venture too far from the safe zone. This area of the ocean is full of unexplored regions, full of all sorts of sensational legends. Ever since defeating Gouda last week and completing Admiral Amiros's commission, he had embarked on the journey to the Gargaz archipelago without stopping. There was no other way, he had to hurry. The hermit seemed very interested in a real-life meeting with a Tarot Club member. At the time, she only thought for a few seconds before agreeing to Mr. World's request. However, based on the danger level, she offered a relatively high price. £3,000. Klein's first reaction was to give up and instead take Mr. Hanged Man's ghost ship. But considering that the latter was accompanied by many Storm Church sailors, he wasn't that free, and the danger level of going to the easternmost area of the Sonia Sea was indeed high. He finally agreed to the hermit's request. To avoid wasting the £1,000 deposit, Klein could only depart as soon as possible. However, because he had to act as Admiral Amiros these past few days and was attacked by the Mother Tree of Desire during this period, even with Renette Tinakel's protection, he didn't dare to enter the dream world. This was because he was afraid that he would die peacefully while sleeping soundly. Being stared at by an evil god on the same level as a true god meant that he would truly dare to sleep and dare to die. As soon as Admiral Amiros returned, he immediately embarked on this journey without stopping. And on the morning of this day, Klein saw the port city with white rock as the main material for its houses. The easternmost colony of the Fursak Empire, the capital of the Gargaz archipelago, Nas. This counts as finally leaving the country. Klein watched as a fishing boat loaded with whale flesh sailed into the harbor, the rough feeling almost tangible. At the same time, he noticed many ships flying pirate flags docked in the harbor without any attempt to hide. Indeed, the area east of Alavi Island is a pirate's paradise. Klein adjusted his hat, picked up his luggage, and after the passenger ship docked, he walked out of the cabin and entered the pier via the gangway. He had agreed to meet Katlia in Nass, and now he needed to go to the agreed-upon meeting point. A general store called Fanatical Whale Dance. After successfully meeting the shop owner who looked like a white bear, with the agreed-upon password, and politely declining the other party's invitation to have a drink, the drunk shop owner grumbled and took out a pure crystal ball. The drunk, white bear, turned his back to Klein, rubbed the crystal ball with both hands, and whispered in difficult and awkward ancient Hermes language. The room gradually darkened, and all the unlit corners deepened, seeming to emit a strange attraction. The crystal ball quickly lit up, and the figure of a woman wearing a black classical robe appeared. She had an oval face, very fair skin, and dark eyes that were slightly purple, full of mysterious meaning. Her gaze narrowed slightly, and she hesitated for a second before opening her mouth and saying, "Gehrman Sparrow." "Yes, Miss Katlia." Klein motioned for the owner to leave the room and, without waiting for Katlia to ask the question in her heart, directly inquired, "When do we depart?" Star Admiral Katlia thought for a moment and replied, "In an hour, Pier 6. Katlia hadn't actually expected Gehrman Sparrow to arrive so quickly, as only a week had passed since they agreed to meet. During this time, she should have been in the Misty Sea, but due to some special reasons, she chose to stay in the Sonia Sea. And Gehrman Sparrow was very lucky. She had just completed her commission and temporarily had no other important matters to attend to, so she had enough time to stay in the Gargaz archipelago. Good, not delaying at all, Klein nodded slightly. Okay. As soon as he finished speaking, the light in the crystal ball suddenly converged, and the figure in the black classical robe became darker and more blurred, quickly disappearing. Klein took out his gold-cased pocket watch, snapped open the cover, and checked the time. It was currently 10 o'clock in the morning, and an hour later would be 11 o'clock. Klein raised an eyebrow, implying that he had originally thought he would have to wait another day or two even after arriving in Nass. But Katlia said she could arrive in an hour, indicating that the Star Admiral was near the Gargaz archipelago. Of course, Klein didn't think she was deliberately waiting for him here, he didn't have that much influence. In other words, Katlia should have been in Nass for some reason. After a brief consideration, Klein no longer hesitated and called a carriage directly to the port area. After waiting for a while at Pier 6, he saw a large sailboat slowly appear in the distance. Based on his limited knowledge of ships, Klein knew that a sailboat of this length was unscientific, but this didn't prevent it from moving smoothly on the dark sea surface, sailing towards the port of Nass. The sailboat got closer and closer, its flag gradually becoming clearer. The crimson but faint moonlight allowed the people in the harbor to see 10 white stars of the same size on it, and those stars surrounded a cold eye without eyelashes. Star Admiral. Future. The arrival of the pirate general caused chaos in the harbor. The shore defense cannons on the mountains on both sides, nervously, adjusted themselves, aiming at the huge sailboat that made no attempt to conceal itself. But looking at the huge ship getting closer and closer, none of the soldiers operating the shore defense cannons dared to fire first. They just watched the ship nervously, watching Klein board the Future and leave with the ship. Black waves surged forward one after another, and the air was filled with black mist so thick it felt like liquid. A jagged mountain peak emerged from the mist, constantly dripping with slime. Beyond this mountain peak, the black mist was boundless, with no end in sight, as if covering an entire continent. Its bottom also had no limit. The deeper one looked, the more profound it felt, as if once something fell, it would fall forever. And on that seemingly boundless dark ocean, a small boat woven from countless green pea vines in the shape of a covered boat was sailing. The small boat sailed on the boundless ocean, and the mist filling the air surged towards the sailing pea boat, as if to completely swallow it. Inside the covered boat of the pea boat, a lady dressed in a white Intis-style shirt and a dark black jacket, with a thin rapier at her waist, dressed as a standard sea captain, frowned slightly. Her azure eyes, which seemed to condense an entire ocean, revealed an expression of extreme solemnity. Because this is the abyss, the source of all degradation, the abyss that can even corrode true God. Even though she had become an angel, she still felt a deep sense of dread towards the abyss. If it weren't absolutely necessary, she would never have appeared here. And it wasn't just her, other demigod and angel would absolutely not dare to easily set foot in the abyss. Because even without considering the corrosion of the abyss itself, the demons living within the abyss were enough to cause most Beyonder who ventured here to die prematurely. Moreover, the abyss is different from other places. The more powerful a Beyonder is, the more terrifying danger they will encounter here. The pervasive black mist was cold and slippery, like wriggling tentacles wrapping around the skin, as if it could permeate flesh and soul. And beneath the dark sea surface, there seemed to be unimaginable horrors hidden. And all of this was constantly eroding the covered boat itself. The outermost green pea vines were almost instantly stained with black spots, and these black spots appeared one after another, quickly connecting into patches, eventually completely corroding the entire pea vine. And often before this, these pea vines would break at the root, and new pea vines would grow from the boat's body, quickly replacing the corroded and deteriorated pea vines, so that the entire boat would maintain a relatively balanced state, not posing a threat to Bernadette inside the covered boat itself. Because even though Bernadette is an angel, she doesn't want to be eroded by the corruption of the abyss. Although she was confident that she could remove the consequences of the erosion, there was no need to take the risk. Because no one knew what they would encounter next, only by maintaining the most perfect state could they better cope with the dangers they might encounter next. The petite doll on her shoulder whispered, "You don't actually need to be so nervous, the abyss isn't as dangerous as you think." Bernadette neither confirmed nor denied it. Perhaps it was indeed not dangerous for you, but she was just an ordinary angel. To take a step back, if they encountered an irresistible danger, complete annihilation was the only outcome. But even then, Rani would only lose a doll, which was insignificant. Although Bernadette also had a backup plan, she wasn't confident enough to definitely escape from the abyss. Life is only one, and no amount of caution is too much. Bernadette was silent for a long time, and finally couldn't help but ask. What exactly are we here to find?" The petite doll tilted her head and asked in confusion. "Didn't I tell you?" Bernadette silently stared at the doll on her shoulder. She was very sure that the other party hadn't said anything. The petite doll put her 10 fingers together and said softly, "That means you didn't ask." Bernadette still didn't speak, because she indeed hadn't asked. The petite doll said calmly, "Lacad is in the abyss, we are here to find him." Lacad? Who is that? Bernadette frowned. She considered herself quite knowledgeable about mysticism. She had even heard of the true names of some god, but she had never heard of this name. The petite doll's eyes seemed to carry a trace of complex emotion, and she said softly, "My full brother." Bernadette's expression shifted slightly. She knew a lot of hidden information about the Beyonder world, so she knew that some god were just ordinary people before becoming Sequence Zero, and their growth trajectory was no different from ordinary Beyonder. It was just that they went further and stood higher than other Beyonder. And this part of God, before they became God, must have had their own parents and siblings. But she had never applied this logic to this one, because she was a god from outside the cosmos, and even her sequence was above God. For such an existence, she really couldn't imagine that she would have parents, or brothers and sisters. Bernadette hesitated and asked, "What kind of existence is he? If he was truly this one's brother, then he was at least a Sequence Zero existence." But as far as she knew, the only god in the abyss was the king of demons who called himself the cosmic dark side and the lord of the abyss. Although this evil god rarely appeared in the real world and was far less famous than other evil gods such as the true creator, hidden sage, and primordial demoness. But the fact that he could occupy the abyss alone meant his strength was self-evident. Could the true name of the cosmic dark side be Lacad? Bernadette subconsciously had a guess, but quickly dismissed it. She felt that things wouldn't be so simple. If the cosmic dark side was the person they were looking for, then there would be no need to personally go to the abyss, which was so troublesome. Because although the cosmic dark side is an evil god, his honorific name is widely circulated in secret organizations like the Blood Sanctify sect. Bernadette also had some knowledge of it, so she could completely contact him by chanting his honorific name and offering sacrifices to him. The petite doll said calmly, "He was once a qualified monarch, possessing the ambition of a hegemon. But now, his ambition has degenerated into base greed, just an undying great serpent that madly devours everything." Lacad, in fact, was like her, both chose the path of blasphemy. The only difference is, she successfully completed her blasphemy, abandoned her physical body, and personally killed the 2 fingers she served. With the king's help, the Golden Order no longer exists, the stars shine on the land of the lands between, and the outer gods can never lay claim to it. As for Lacad, he was already beyond saving the moment he fed himself to the great serpent. His only purpose of existence was as a convenient tool. That's why she came to find Lacad, to find this tool that she personally threw into this world, to complete her plan. Bernadette didn't know this, she just frowned and thought. Why a snake? And why in the abyss? If he is not the cosmic dark side, and possesses the strength of a true god, why have I never heard of the name Lacad? If he is a true god, what is his divine name? P.S. The Carrion family's upbringing is still very good. They are indeed worthy of being the former royal family. Among the 3 siblings, there is no need to mention Radon. The Star-Scourge general is a true man. And Rykard was also a respected and loved demigod in the past, with extremely strong charisma and loyal subordinates. Even when he fed himself to the serpent in blasphemy, his subordinates did not stop him. It's just a pity that Rykard went too far and was completely swallowed by the great serpent, becoming an appendage himself. But even so, his subordinates did not give up. Instead, they made a serpent-hunting spear and went to crusade against the undying great serpent without hesitation, wanting to give Rykard his final dignity. And Ranni, even though she knew that Blade was a hidden danger planted by the 2 fingers, did not eliminate him. Instead, she always remembered the kindness of Blade and IG. In contrast, the Golden family and the Inbred family, one can only say that they are all oddballs. The Golden lineage is a little better, at least there is Morgott to hold the fort. But it just so happens that this only figurehead is regarded as an omen because he was born with horns, and despite being the son of the dignified Elden Lord, he was thrown into the sewers as soon as he was born. And it was precisely this omen, who lived in the sewers, that maintained the last dignity of the Golden family. As for Morgott's twin brother Moj, he's a pure male copper plus copper smelting, beyond description from birth. Godric is even less worth mentioning, the weakest demigod, purely a freak. Godwyn is not to be blamed much, after all, he died early, just a bit tragic. The Inbred family has the fewest members, but they are the most bizarre. Malenia is a brother complex, and an extreme one at that. Without a word, she fought a battle with Radon, fighting until both were heavily injured, one unable to suppress the scarlet rot, and the other being corroded by the scarlet rot. It just so happens that this battle was completely unnecessary, and fighting it had absolutely no meaning. This behavior can only be described with one word: King of Rot. And Miquella, not only is he cursed and will never grow up, but he also inherited his parents' biggest trait. Can be male, female, or inbred, and was finally stolen by a male copper who was copper smelting. His tragic degree is not far from Godwyn's. Comparing them, you will find that the most unconventional Carrion family is actually the most normal. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.